Let us travel together to Cairnholm Island on 3 September 1940. On the Welsh island of Cairnholm, before dawn on 3 September 1940, Miss Peregrine's house waits for the same day to begin again. Beyond its garden, the Second World War moves forward. Within the house, clocks, meals, lessons, and footsteps return to their familiar places. At Cairnholm, the fictional Welsh island, dawn arrives beneath a grey sky and the distant murmur of aircraft. You are standing beside the old house while the first light gathers along the rain-dark stone walls. Salt wind moves over the Welsh shore, carrying the faint taste of iron and seaweed. Before the windows brighten, clocks begin their patient ticking inside the house. Their sounds overlap through the corridors, each mechanism measuring the final minutes before morning. Somewhere above you, a floorboard settles. Somewhere below, a kettle waits beside the range. The air is cold against your face, and the garden remains blurred beneath a veil of rain. Beyond the cliffs, the sea folds itself steadily against the rocks. Far overhead, distant aircraft pass beneath the grey sky, their engines softened by cloud and distance. The house seems to listen. It has heard this morning many times. Inside, the children are already moving through the familiar rooms of Miss Peregrine's home. Bronwyn carries wood towards the kitchen, while Hugh checks the small wooden boxes where his bees sleep. Emma stands near the stove, watching the kettle tremble. Enoch is still upstairs, and Olive drifts quietly along the landing, her feet scarcely touching the boards. They are peculiar children, though the phrase sounds too small for the lives they carry. Miss Peregrine watches over them, an Ymbryne whose peculiar form is that of a peregrine falcon. She has learned to guard this house through patience, discipline, and time. The children have learned the shape of every hour. Breakfast will come first. Lessons will follow. Errands will lead them down towards the shore. Above the island, the aircraft continue eastward. A pale stripe of light lies across the kitchen table, touching the china cups arranged beside the teapot. You can feel the grain of the old wood beneath your fingertips, smooth in some places and rough in others. Tea cools slowly in its cups, leaving a delicate brown crescent beneath each rim. Rain gathers on the window panes and slips downward in crooked threads. The walls retain the warmth of the range, while the corners remain cool and shadowed. You hear the low hiss of coal, the soft scrape of a chair, and the repeated ticking of clocks beyond the kitchen door. Outside, salt wind presses against the house with a steady breath. The garden smells of wet earth and bruised leaves. Even the silence seems arranged, as though each small sound has been placed carefully within the morning. On the ordinary timeline, this morning would have led towards the German bombing raid that destroyed the house. The aircraft would have crossed the island soon afterwards, and the children's refuge would have ended beneath fire, stone, and falling glass. Miss Peregrine knew what was coming. She understood that the house could not withstand the raid if time moved forward in its usual manner. So the loop was made. The day seemed to fold back upon itself, with 3 September 1940 serving as both shelter and boundary. The bombing remains just beyond the edge of repetition. It approaches, but never arrives. Each evening reaches the same darkness, and each dawn returns the house to safety. The refuge survives because the date does not. A low wind moves through the chimneys, making the rooms murmur in their sleep. You stand near the eastern windows and watch the sea disappear beneath sheets of rain. The stone walls are dark with moisture, their surfaces shining where the weak light finds them. Along the hallway, coats hang heavily from wooden pegs, giving off the scent of wool and salt. A brass clock trembles on its shelf, then resumes its measured ticking. The sound travels through the house without hurry. In the dining room, steam fades from the tea, leaving the china cool beneath your hand. The sky remains grey from horizon to horizon. Somewhere far away, aircraft engines gather and thin again. Their presence is not yet danger. It is only a distant vibration beneath the weather. The children remember the previous mornings and the mornings before those. Their repeating day is not simple amnesia, and it is not an endlessly fresh beginning. They know that Bronwyn will lift the heavy basket with one hand. They know that Hugh's bees will stir when the shutters open. They know that Emma will complain about the rain, though she will still walk beside the others towards the village. They know which lessons Miss Peregrine will assign, and which errands will take longer than expected. Memory passes from one cycle to the next, even while the calendar returns to the same square. Their bodies remain young because the loop prevents ordinary change. Outside the loop, decades pass. Within it, the children remain held in the appearance of wartime youth. Along the narrow paths around the house, rain has filled the hollows between the stones. Your shoes make a quiet sound against the wet ground, never quite a splash. Ferns bow beneath the drops, and the grass bends inland under the salt wind. A gull calls from the cliff, then falls silent as the aircraft pass overhead. The house rises behind you with its steep roof, narrow windows, and darkened chimneys. It looks old enough to belong to another century, yet the morning inside feels more recent than the world beyond the island. China cups wait beside saucers. A schoolbook lies open beside a ruler. A damp coat hangs over a chair. The smallest things retain their place. The rain returns to the windows. The clocks return to their ticking. Jacob Portman comes to Cairnholm after the death of his grandfather Abraham. In the ordinary contemporary world, Abraham's story seemed tangled with old photographs and wartime memories. Jacob has grown up hearing fragments about peculiar children, a dangerous island, and a house where strange things once happened. He does not know whether the stories are memories, inventions, or the last confusions of an old man. Yet Abraham's death leaves behind a trail that leads Jacob across the sea. His arrival creates the bridge between two worlds. One world contains modern roads, ordinary houses, and the quiet aftermath of grief. The other contains Miss Peregrine, the peculiar children, and a house hidden inside one repeated day. The ferry leaves a pale wake behind it as you approach the island. Salt wind presses against your coat and lifts the edges of your hair. The Welsh shore appears gradually through rain, first as a dark line, then as a cluster of stone buildings, then as cliffs rising behind the harbour. Water knocks gently against the ferry's side. Ropes creak. Gulls circle above the roofs, their wings pale against the low cloud. The harbour stones shine like black glass. On the quay, rain-dark walls hold the smell of kelp, tar, and wet rope. Jacob steps onto the island, carrying Abraham's memory with him. The air feels colder than the mainland. The village seems quiet. Beyond it, the old house waits among the trees, concealed by weather and distance. At first, Jacob believes the island stories are connected to Abraham's old photographs and his memories of the war. The images show children with impossible qualities, preserved in pale silver light. One girl appears to float above the ground. Another holds an object that should be too heavy for her. A boy stands among bees. The pictures seem to prove something, but they prove nothing clearly enough. Jacob searches for the house because Abraham directed him towards it, and because grief makes every instruction feel important. When he finds the children, the photographs become more than photographs. Their faces have aged hardly at all. Their clothes belong to another era. Their names match the stories. The hidden world is real, and it is impossible. The path climbs through wet grass and between low walls covered in moss. Water beads along the fern fronds and gathers in the hollows of the stone. You smell the peat-dark earth beneath the rain, mingled with the sharper scent of the sea. The house is partly hidden by trees whose leaves tremble in the wind. Their branches brush one another with a soft, dry whisper. Near the garden gate, a rusted hinge moves slightly, though no one touches it. Somewhere inside, a clock marks the hour. Its sound is faint, but clear enough to follow. The rain softens every outline. Roof tiles become dark scales. Window glass becomes dull silver. The house seems to withdraw into the weather, retaining its warmth for those already within. Miss Peregrine explains the nature of the refuge through calm instructions and careful demonstrations. She is an Ymbryne, a peculiar woman who can alter her shape into that of a peregrine falcon. Her work is to protect peculiar people and to guide the loops that shelter them. The house has been caught on 3 September 1940, just before the bombing raid would destroy it in ordinary time. Each cycle begins with the same morning. Each cycle unfolds through the same meals, lessons, errands, and dangers. The children live the same calendar date repeatedly, while retaining every memory gathered from the previous return. Their home is therefore preserved, but never renewed. It remains alive by refusing the passage that would change it. The kitchen grows brighter without becoming warm. Thin daylight settles over the table, and the china cups cast small, blurred shadows. A cloth hangs beside the sink, damp at its folded edge. The kettle gives a quiet click as its heat subsides. Tea cools in the cups, losing its steam one delicate thread at a time. Through the open door, you hear footsteps crossing the hall, followed by the deeper rhythm of clocks. Rain taps against the glass with uneven patience. The range exhales the smell of coal and warm iron. On a shelf, jars of preserves catch the weak light. Their labels are handwritten, their lids slightly clouded. Beyond the walls, salt wind moves over the island, and distant aircraft fade into the grey sky. Breakfast begins as it has begun on every remembered morning. Miss Peregrine sits at the head of the table, composed and watchful. The children take their places with varying degrees of obedience. Jacob remains uncertain among them, still carrying the habits of the contemporary world. He sees the uniforms, the rationed food, the old newspapers, and the careful use of every object. He notices how quickly the others respond to small changes in sound. A distant engine can still interrupt a conversation. A shadow across the window can still quiet the room. Yet the meal proceeds. Bread is divided. Tea is poured. A spoon touches china. The household follows its fixed order because safety depends on repetition. The same morning must be completed before it can begin again. In the dining room, the tablecloth feels cool beneath your palm, its woven surface marked by faint lines from years of washing. A small dish of butter softens near the center. Crumbs rest beside a plate, and a dark ring of tea stains the wood beneath a saucer. The windows are blurred by rain, turning the garden into a wash of green and grey. You hear a chair move, then the careful placing of a cup. The sounds are domestic and close. Beyond them, the sea remains distant but constant. Wind touches the roof and slides along the eaves. Somewhere overhead, a shutter taps once against its frame. The house holds each noise gently, as though nothing within it should be allowed to travel too far. Lessons follow breakfast in the schoolroom at the eastern side of the house. Miss Peregrine teaches history, arithmetic, languages, and the practical disciplines required by peculiar life. Jacob listens while the children work through subjects they have studied many times. Their attention wanders because the material is familiar, yet memory prevents the hour from becoming empty. Each lesson carries the knowledge of earlier cycles. A mistake made yesterday can be avoided today. A question asked before may be answered without waiting. Their lives accumulate understanding even while their bodies remain fixed. This is the quiet paradox at the center of the house. The children grow inwardly through memory, but they do not grow older. They change, yet the date does not. The schoolroom smells of chalk, paper, and damp wool. You sit near the tall window where rain makes a translucent curtain over the glass. A wooden ruler lies beside an open exercise book. The paper has a faint roughness, and the ink dries slowly in the moist air. Chalk dust clings to the blackboard in pale islands. A clock above the shelves marks each minute with a restrained click. Outside, the garden glistens beneath the weather. Ferns shine along the wall. Drops gather at the ends of leaves before falling into the dark soil. The room is quiet except for pages turning, pencils moving, and the softened breath of the children. Aircraft remain far away. The grey sky presses close, but the house stays still. After lessons, the children divide the errands between them. Emma carries a basket towards the village. Bronwyn helps with the heavier work. Olive remains close to the house, while Hugh keeps watch over the bees. Enoch moves through the corridors with an expression of practiced suspicion. Jacob follows because the island still feels unfamiliar, and because the routine gives him something solid to hold. Every errand has its hour. Every path has its remembered puddle. Every shopkeeper has already spoken the words that will be spoken again. The children know which windows are open and which gates stick in wet weather. Their knowledge makes the day efficient, but never entirely peaceful. Beneath the ordinary movements lies the knowledge of the raid. The danger is waiting beyond the loop. The village road bends between walls blackened by rain. You walk beside the children while the wind carries the smell of salt inland. Water runs along the edges of the path, finding small channels between the stones. A cartwheel leaves a dark track through the mud. From one cottage comes the faint scent of bread. From another, smoke drifts low beneath the weather. The children's footsteps keep a steady rhythm. Their coats brush against one another. Somewhere above the clouds, engines pass like distant machinery behind a closed door. You cannot see the aircraft, but you feel their presence in the slight pause that enters the group. Then the children continue. The village remains. The rain continues falling. The morning has not broken. Jacob gradually understands that the house is not merely old and not merely hidden. It is a refuge maintained against the ordinary direction of history. The loop places the children within the opening months of the Second World War, immediately before the bombing that would otherwise end their home. Outside, nations move towards destruction. Inside, breakfast returns, lessons return, and the children return to the same rooms. Their apparent wartime domestic routine is therefore a carefully preserved moment rather than an ordinary household life. The house is not living through the war. It is holding one instant just before the war reaches it. Its safety depends upon the fixed order of the day and upon Miss Peregrine's ability to keep that order intact. Rainwater drips from the eaves in a measured line, striking the stone below with a soft, repeated sound. You pause beneath the shelter of an archway and feel the cold moisture in the air. The walls are rough where age has lifted the surface, but smooth where countless hands have passed. Moss grows in the joints between the stones. A small beetle moves slowly along a ledge, carrying its dark shell through the damp. In the distance, the harbour bells sound once, muffled by fog. Tea cools somewhere inside the house, untouched for a few minutes. The scent of wet leaves enters through the open door. The clocks continue counting. Their ticking is not urgent. It is simply present, like rain, like breath, like the sea. The approaching raid becomes clearer as the day advances. Aircraft move across the distant sky, and the children remember how close the sound came in earlier cycles. They know the pattern of engines, the direction of the wind, and the hour when fear usually gathers. Yet the danger cannot pass fully into the house. The loop holds the bombing beyond its boundary. On the day before the raid, the aircraft can be heard. The house can tremble with anticipation. The children can imagine the destruction waiting beyond the loop. But that moment never arrives. The raid remains a wound held at a distance, always threatening, never completed. That is the price of preservation. Life continues, but ordinary change has been refused. Under the afternoon cloud, the shore appears almost colorless. You stand among rounded stones polished by the tide, their surfaces slick beneath your boots. Salt wind moves across your face and brings the cold breath of open water. The waves arrive in long grey folds, then withdraw with a whisper over the shingle. Above the cliffs, clouds pass slowly, hiding and revealing the weak sun. A strand of seaweed clings to the rocks, shining like dark ribbon. In the village behind you, a door closes softly. From the house, faintly, comes the sound of a bell and then the distant ticking of clocks. The island feels separated from the mainland by more than water. It seems held apart by weather, memory, and the repeated shape of one day. The 2016 film adaptation carried this hidden house into another form. Tim Burton directed the film, shaping Riggs's novel into a visual world of rain, stone, peculiar children, and suspended time. Eva Green played Miss Peregrine, bringing the Ymbrynes' watchfulness into the center of the story. The film premiered at Fantastic Fest in Austin on 25 September 2016. It was released in the United States on 30 September 2016 and in Germany on 6 October 2016. These dates belong to a later world, separated from the loop by decades and by the difference between fiction and history. The film is an adaptation of Ransom Riggs's novel rather than a historical account of the Second World War. The house remains imagined, even when its details feel almost tangible. Evening gathers slowly around the island. The rain has weakened, leaving the windows covered with fine beads of water. You smell smoke from the chimneys and the mineral dampness of the stone walls. Inside, lamps make small pools of amber light along the hall. Their glow touches brass handles, polished banisters, and the edges of framed pictures. A cup sits near the fire, its tea now cool. The china holds the faint warmth of the room, but no longer the heat of the drink. Beyond the glass, the sea darkens beneath a low sky. One gull crosses the harbor and disappears into mist. The house settles around you with small creaks. Clocks tick in separate rooms, joining and separating like quiet footsteps. The children return from their errands and move towards supper. Their conversations carry references to earlier cycles, corrections to forgotten details, and small jokes whose meanings have changed through repetition. Jacob watches them with increasing wonder. He understands that they have not been trapped in ignorance. They know the date. They know the danger. They remember the lives they have lived within the same narrow circle. Some have been there for decades outside the loop, while remaining children inside it. Their youth is preserved by the same mechanism that confines them. The loop gives them safety, but it also prevents departure into an uncertain future. It saves the house by keeping it unfinished. Every safe evening contains the shape of the morning that must follow. In the dining room, supper is warm and quiet. Firelight moves across the silverware and fades along the dark wood. You hear the gentle scrape of plates, the murmur of conversation, and rain loosening itself from the roof. The air smells of soup, coal, and wet coats drying near the hearth. Shadows gather beneath the chairs. A clock ticks above the mantel, its hands approaching an hour already known. Outside, the wind turns over the sea. Waves touch the rocks below the cliffs, retreating and returning without end. The children's faces glow briefly in the firelight. Their expressions are young, but their eyes carry old mornings. The room feels secure. It also feels suspended. Nothing is entirely beginning, and nothing is allowed to finish. Night comes, though the night is not an ending. Miss Peregrine checks the windows and walks through the corridors. She makes certain that the children are in their rooms, that the lamps are low, and that the house remains prepared for the hours ahead. Jacob stands near the stairway, listening to the weather. He has entered a world connected to Abraham's photographs, but larger than any photograph could contain. The peculiar children are real. The island is real within the story. Miss Peregrine is real within the loop. Beyond the darkness waits the bombing raid that history would otherwise have brought. The day closes carefully, knowing that it will soon be required again. The house is safe because the next date cannot arrive. The windows reflect the rooms more clearly now. You see the lamps, the banister, and the soft outline of the fire. Rain-dark stone walls hold the last traces of evening damp. The air near the floor is cool. Higher up, warmth gathers beneath the ceiling. A curtain stirs beside the window, lifted by a narrow current from the frame. In the distance, aircraft pass beneath the grey remnants of cloud, their sound fading towards the sea. The clocks continue their quiet work before dawn. Their ticking travels through the house, room by room. The fire gives a small sigh. Ash settles. A cup rests untouched on a table. The island grows still. Jacob goes to sleep knowing that the house will wake again on 3 September 1940. The children sleep with the same knowledge, each carrying memories of earlier returns into the darkness. Morning will bring the same light, the same breakfast, the same lessons, and the same errands. The bombing will remain just beyond the loop, waiting at a distance that cannot be crossed. The children will remain young. The house will remain standing. The central paradox rests quietly inside these facts. Repetition preserves life by preventing ordinary change. The refuge survives because it cannot move forward. Every safe evening is also a return to the same beginning, and every beginning carries the memory of what waits beyond it. Now the house is quiet. Rain rests on the roof. The clocks continue. The sea moves below the cliffs. Salt wind passes over the Welsh shore and fades among the trees. The stone walls grow colder. Tea cools in china cups. Somewhere above the darkened rooms, a shutter gives one soft tap. Then silence gathers again. The date remains 3 September 1940. The lamps burn low. The children sleep. The house waits for dawn, and dawn waits within the house. Within the house, morning is made from a single day, its walls formed by the repeated date of 3 September 1940. You wake beneath the same quiet roof, with pale light resting upon the curtains and rain touching the glass. The door opens onto that morning again, preserving its hour with remarkable patience. Around you, the children move through a world whose calendar has stopped, though their memories continue to gather year after year. The house does not become younger, and neither does the knowledge carried within it. Each cycle offers another beginning, while every remembered cycle remains folded quietly behind the next. Miss Peregrine's loop is therefore a room made from one day, a shelter whose ceiling is time and whose floor is familiar repetition. It is not merely a house concealed upon a Welsh island, but a house enclosed within a controlled temporal interval. Pale morning enters through windows filmed with moisture, and the garden lies beneath a silver veil. Wet grass bends under rain that never quite dries, because the day always returns before the ground can lose its dampness. A paper calendar hangs beside the kitchen door, its pages fixed permanently upon 3 September 1940. Another calendar rests upstairs, while a third remains folded near the study, each holding the same date in quiet obedience. Air carries the faint sense of peat smoke, old wood, and tea cooling in china cups. Beyond the walls, the sea moves below the cliffs, though its waters belong to a wider succession of mornings. Inside, the muffled hush resembles a sealed room, where distant sounds arrive softened and uncertain. Wind moves through the garden, passing among plants that cannot grow older, while the leaves tremble without changing their season. You learn the pattern of the day by living inside its repetition. At 1 hour, a door opens. At another, a meal is placed upon the table. A familiar footstep crosses the corridor, a particular bird calls from the garden, and the same shaft of light reaches the staircase. The children remember each event because memory is not reset when the day begins again. You can therefore distinguish the ordinary shape of the loop from disturbances that enter it. A stone shifted near the gate, an unfamiliar shadow beyond the hedge, or a silence where sound should be may reveal that something has changed. The rules of this peculiar world make repetition practical, since knowledge of the pattern allows residents to prepare for irregularities. Yet that same knowledge carries a quiet weakness. A refuge that can be carefully studied may also be carefully watched, and a schedule can become a map for anyone patient enough to learn it. Morning returns with rain brushing the roof in a thin, continuous texture. Pale brightness gathers along the hallway floor, although the clouds beyond the boundary may belong to another hour entirely. A brass handle feels cold beneath your fingers, and the door gives its familiar soft movement as you pass through. On the table, bread is warm from recent preparation, while the cloth beneath it remains smooth and undisturbed. The garden smells of crushed leaves and wet stone, but no blossom advances towards decay, and no fallen fruit darkens with time. Somewhere behind you, a clock marks the hour with a restrained note, its sound absorbed by the house's muffled hush. Wind moves through branches that remain almost exactly as they were, carrying salt from the shore and the mineral scent of the cliffs. Everything seems alive, yet nothing proceeds beyond its appointed condition. Outside the loop, history continues with the merciless steadiness of an ordinary calendar. The date of 4 September 1940 approaches beyond the boundary, carrying the bombing that would otherwise make the house's destruction permanent. Inside Miss Peregrine's house, the repeated 3 September prevents that next day from settling into the lives of its inhabitants. The loop interrupts the sequence at the point chosen by the Ymbryne. Preserving a refuge before catastrophe can become part of its permanent history. The children remain within a calm that is historically situated because the setting belongs to wartime Britain, while the time loop mechanism belongs to fantasy. Around you, the world appears to pause at the edge of disaster, while the larger world continues through war, hunger, displacement, and fear. The loop does not deny that history exists. It holds one small place apart from history's ordinary movement. Rain gathers in shallow hollows along the path, forming dark mirrors beneath the hedges. Each morning, the puddles return with the same uncertain shine, and each evening they remain waiting for a night that cannot fully pass. Grass presses cool against your shoes, heavy with moisture that never quite leaves the blades. Along the house, stone walls hold the smell of rain and lichen, while narrow windows reflect a sky suspended between dawn and noon. The kitchen retains the gentle warmth of bread, milk, and black tea, and cups wait upon their saucers, as though a hand has only just placed them there. Curtains breathe inward when wind reaches the shutters, then settle again without showing any sign of age. In the garden, the air is full of restrained movement, but the plants remain within their appointed season. Even silence feels preserved, like sound enclosed beneath thick cloth. The protection offered by a loop can be understood as a boundary drawn around danger. Within it, peculiar people may escape persecution, war, aging, and the ordinary violences that threaten them beyond its edge. A child who would otherwise grow older outside remains biologically held within the loop's repeated date, while remembered experience continues to accumulate. You may therefore stand beside someone whose face appears unchanged, though that person carries decades of observation, grief, affection, and learned caution. Biological age, remembered experience, and calendar age no longer move together as they do in the ordinary world. The arrangement creates a strange separation among three kinds of time. The body remains within one condition, the mind gathers another history, and the calendar advances elsewhere. Safety is achieved through this separation, but the cost is an ordinary future that cannot be entered without consequence. The house receives morning as a sealed vessel receives light. Dust rests upon the window ledges, yet it does not gather into neglect, because each cycle restores the room to its familiar arrangement. A jacket hangs beside the entrance, its fabric holding the shape of an absent shoulder. Shoes wait beneath the bench, their leather neither newly made nor worn beyond repair. The smell of soap lingers near the washroom, while the dining room carries traces of toast, jam, and smoke from the grate. Outside, rain moves across the garden in fine threads, and wet grass keeps its dark green color. A paper calendar remains pinned beside the pantry, its single visible date untouched. The clocks continue with measured dignity, though they never carry the household into a new day. From the corridor comes a muffled movement, followed by quiet, and the pale morning settles more deeply over the house. You can leave the loop, and the possibility of departure gives its safety a sharp edge. Beyond the boundary, ordinary historical time resumes its full pressure, bringing aging, war, weather, and the consequences of events held away. The children can cross into that wider sequence, but they cannot take the loop's protection with them as though it were a coat. A step beyond the controlled interval exposes them to the date from which the house has been sheltered. The outside world does not wait politely for their arrival. Its years may have advanced, its dangers may have multiplied, and its people may have grown older while the children remained nearly unchanged. The refuge is therefore not a limitless escape from history. It is a sanctuary with a boundary, and that boundary matters because the world beyond remains real, moving, and capable of causing harm. A door stands at the edge of the house, its painted surface smooth beneath many familiar hands. When it opens onto the garden, the morning waits beyond the threshold, with rain suspended upon leaves and the path shining under grey light. The hinges make a modest sound, neither louder nor softer than before. Cool air crosses your face, carrying wet earth, salt, and the faint sweetness of grass. In the distance, waves break below the cliffs, though their rhythm seems to belong to a larger world than the house can contain. The muffled hush returns when the door closes, drawing the rooms back into protected stillness. Nearby, a calendar page lies flat beneath a paperweight, bearing the same date as every other visible page. The garden cannot grow older, yet wind keeps moving through it, restless within a place made still. The boundary protects geographically and temporally, but it does not create absolute safety. Enemies may discover an entrance, learn where a loop is anchored, and attack the refuge from outside. A hidden house may remain concealed from ordinary travelers while becoming visible to those who understand peculiar geography and temporal thresholds. The loop can delay destruction, preserve a moment, and conceal an inhabited place, but it cannot make that place unreachable to every determined adversary. Its protection resembles a wall with a door rather than an invisible world without openings. Once an entrance is known, the distinction between outside danger and inside safety becomes less secure. The children must still watch, remember, and respond. Their knowledge of the repeated day helps them recognize an intrusion, but recognition does not remove the danger. Time has been shaped into shelter, not transformed into invulnerability. Moisture shines upon the garden gate, and the metal latch is cold against your palm. The path beyond appears unchanged, its stones darkened by rain and its borders softened with moss. A low wind travels through the shrubs, disturbing leaves that never turn brown and branches that never become bare. Grass gives off a green, almost loamy scent, while the sea adds a distant thread of salt to every breath. Indoors, the house keeps its warmth, and the air near the fireplace contains the dry fragrance of ash and old timber. China rests gently against china when someone moves a cup, producing a small sound that disappears into the sealed room hush. The same meal waits in the dining room, preserved not by ordinary freshness, but by the peculiar condition of the day. A clock ticks near the stairs, and its measured sound seems to underline the boundary rather than cross it. The stability of the loop allows buildings, clothing, meals, and routines to remain in dependable condition. A room does not require endless repair when its materials return to the same state each morning. Garments retain their familiar cut and color, and a meal can be prepared according to a sequence already known. You may find comfort in knowing that the table will be set, the kettle warm, and the same windows admit the same grey light. Such regularity permits planning, and planning becomes a form of security when the world outside is uncertain. Yet preservation can also become confinement. A building that never changes cannot reveal a new room through renovation, and clothing that never wears out cannot record ordinary years upon its fabric. The house remains a refuge because it resists change, while the children remain themselves because the loop interrupts bodily time. Both forms of safety depend upon stillness. Rain has thinned, leaving beads of water along the railings and window frames. Your hand passes over a banister polished by repeated use, its surface smooth but not diminished. The carpet holds the muted scent of wool, dust, and smoke, while a draught moves beneath the door with the coolness of the shore. In the kitchen, a loaf rests beneath a cloth, and the fabric remains clean despite the many mornings it has covered the same bread. A plate catches a narrow reflection of light, trembling whenever wind presses against the shutters. Outside, wet grass bends beneath droplets that do not evaporate, and the garden waits in its unchanging season. The house seems to breathe through old timbers and quiet corridors, although its rhythm is tied to one morning. Beyond the walls, clouds continue towards distant places, carrying weather through a world where the calendar still advances. Because memory accumulates inside the loop, repetition never means complete sameness for those who live within it. The morning may return unchanged, but the children meet it with altered understanding. They remember conversations, injuries, lessons, discoveries, and the gradual shaping of friendships. A familiar hour can therefore contain a different emotional weight each time it arrives. One child may know that a certain silence precedes danger, while another remembers how a particular visitor once crossed the garden. Their bodies remain held within the same narrow interval, but their minds carry a widening archive. The loop protects them from ordinary aging while leaving them exposed to the passage of thought. This is one of its quiet paradoxes. The calendar does not advance for the inhabitants, yet experience continues to make them older in every way memory can measure. Safety preserves the body, while time continues inside the mind. The rooms remain dim beneath the rain-heavy sky, and light lies softly upon the furniture. A woolen sleeve brushes against the back of a chair, releasing the faint, dry scent of cloth kept indoors. Floorboards answer each footstep with a familiar creak, though the sound never deepens into structural decay. Near the window, a small drop of water trembles upon the glass without falling, then appears again when the morning begins anew. The garden beyond is softened by mist, and the trees hold their leaves with patient stillness. A paper calendar hangs in the passage, its corners slightly curled, but never advancing to another page. The fireplace gives off low warmth, and ash rests in its grate like grey powder beneath a sleeping hand. From far below, the sea sends a muffled pulse against the rocks, reminding the house that another world continues beyond its walls. The fixed date offers protection precisely because it is linked to a real wartime setting. The danger of 4 September 1940 belongs to the historical world, with its aircraft, bombs, uncertainty, and irreversible consequences. Miss Peregrine's house remains at 3 September 1940 before the bombing can become a permanent fact for those inside. The books use this arrangement to place fantasy beside history without pretending that the two are identical. The wartime setting gives the refuge gravity, while the loop introduces a mechanism by which one place can resist the sequence around it. You stand inside a fictional shelter built against a recognizable form of historical violence. The date is real within the setting, but the repeated day is a fantasy device. Together, they make the house feel both anchored and impossible, located in history, yet protected from its ordinary forward motion. Grey light gathers upon the wet stones, and the sea below the cliffs turns the color of pewter. The wind has quietened, but it still moves through the garden with a slow and searching touch. Grass clings to your shoes, and cold rises through the soles from the ground. A shutter rests against its frame, holding the faint smell of rain-soaked wood. Indoors, the air is warmer, touched by tea, wool, and the dry sweetness of burning peat. The clocks continue their patient work, and their hands pass across familiar numbers without carrying the house into a new date. In the dining room, china cups stand beside a plate of bread. each object settled within an arrangement the morning will restore. The sealed room hush gathers around the furniture, while the world beyond the windows remains full of roads, aircraft, fields, and moving weather. The books use the loop to explore the cost of safety, when safety requires surrendering an ordinary future. Inside the house, the children are protected from many dangers, yet they cannot simply grow into the lives that time would otherwise provide. They do not pass through school years in the usual sequence, move into unfamiliar homes, or watch their faces change with age. Their remembered experiences grow, but their calendar age remains fixed within the day the loop contains. The refuge preserves them by withholding certain forms of change, and preservation can become a quiet kind of loss. You may feel the comfort of a world where disaster is held beyond the door, while sensing the sadness of a future placed beyond reach. The loop is valuable because it protects life, yet its protection asks life to remain within a carefully limited shape. Rainwater rests along the windowsill, and the glass feels cool when your fingertips approach it. Beyond the pane, the garden appears close enough to touch, though the controlled interval separates it from the historical world outside. A path curves beneath dripping branches, returning towards the house, as though it has forgotten how to lead elsewhere. The scent of damp soil rises from the lawn, but no deeper autumnal smell develops. Leaves remain green, flowers hold their forms, and wind passes through them without bringing the slow work of decay. Inside, a chair stands near the fireplace, its wood dark and smooth beneath the light. The room carries a hush like a sealed chamber, softened by distant footsteps and the small movement of clocks. Every surface seems familiar, and familiarity becomes almost physical, like a blanket drawn carefully over the household. The practical strength of repetition is visible in the way the inhabitants organize their days. You know when a person will enter the room, when a meal will appear, and when part of the house will become quiet. Such knowledge reduces uncertainty, allowing the children to prepare for ordinary tasks and sudden disturbances alike. The loop's pattern becomes a shared language, spoken through timing rather than words. A departure can be measured against the usual sequence, and an unexpected sound can be recognized before its source is seen. Planning therefore becomes possible even when the outside world is consumed by confusion. Yet a pattern can be studied by enemies as well as residents. Anyone who learns the hour of a door, the route through a garden, or the interval between movements may use that knowledge against the house. The refuge gains order, but order leaves traces, and traces can guide those who seek entry. A faint current moves beneath the corridor doors, carrying the scent of wet leaves into warmer rooms. The floor remains firm under your feet, and the boards give back their accustomed sounds. Rain touches the roof in uneven patterns, with some drops striking sharply and others dissolving into the larger murmur. The garden lies still beyond the glass, its shrubs holding the same shapes through another beginning. A calendar page waits beside a dark wooden clock, and the printed date remains clear beneath the soft indoor light. In the kitchen, steam gathers briefly above a cup, then fades before it can alter the room. Air near the fireplace feels dry against your face, while the window-side air is cold and mineral-rich. Between those currents, the house maintains its narrow climate, protected from the wider changes of the day. A loop's value depends upon the Ymbryne who creates it and keeps its time in order. The boundary is not an automatic property of the house, nor does the repeated date maintain itself without care. Someone must shape the interval, understand its limits, and preserve the conditions that allow the refuge to continue. Miss Peregrine's protection is therefore also an expression of responsibility. Her authority is temporal as well as domestic, because the children's safety depends upon the loop's continued integrity. If its rules are misunderstood, its entrances exposed, or its maintenance fails, the house becomes vulnerable to the world it has resisted. The children may learn the pattern, but they do not command the deeper mechanism. Their refuge depends upon someone able to hold one day apart from the pressure of every other day. The house grows quieter as rain settles into fine mist. Along the stairs, the air smells of dust, polish, and damp wool, with smoke lingering from the lower rooms. Window opens onto the familiar morning, and the garden receives the wind without aging beneath its touch. Wet grass shines between the stones, refusing to dry before the cycle begins again. The paper calendar remains fixed, its single date dark against the pale wall. In the dining room, cups cool upon their saucers, and a cloth lies across the table with the precision of a prepared ritual. The sea continues below the cliffs, sending a low vibration through the stone foundations. Nothing in the house announces the passage of outside hours, although distant weather keeps changing beyond the boundary. Stillness is not silence, and silence is not emptiness. The peculiar world treats time as something that can be shaped and inhabited rather than merely measured by clocks and calendars. A day can become a dwelling, an interval can become a border, and a person can be entrusted with a temporal shelter. This idea gives the loop its unusual force. It is not only a means of avoiding danger, but a different understanding of existence. The inhabitants do not stand outside time altogether. They occupy a chosen arrangement, returning to its beginning while carrying experience forward within themselves. You can imagine the loop as a current folded back upon itself, allowing the house to remain in one place while memories travel through it. The world beyond continues in a straight line, but the refuge follows a circle. Neither form of time is completely free, because each carries its own obligations and losses. The damp garden waits beneath a sky brightening at its edges. Water trembles on the leaves, and wind moves slowly through branches that cannot become taller. The ground gives a soft response beneath your steps, holding the coldness of repeated rain. Near the path, a gate stands in its familiar position, its latch bright with moisture and its hinges quiet. Through the open door, the house offers warmth, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of tea. Within the threshold, the morning remains neither brighter nor older than before. The muffled hush feels almost tender, though distant movement reminds you that the household remains watchful. Far beyond the garden, the sea carries weather towards another shore, and clouds travel through a world that cannot be held within the loop. The calm of the refuge is therefore never simple. It contains the continuing war outside, the knowledge of aging, and the awareness that enemies may eventually discover its entrances. It also contains the sorrow of lives held within a date that cannot open naturally into a future. The repeated 3 September 1940 protects the children from the bombing of 4 September, yet it cannot provide every form of freedom. They can leave, but departure exposes them to ordinary history. They can remain, but remaining means accepting the restrictions of a day that will not advance. The loop gives them shelter through separation, and separation always has a cost. Its boundary is geographical because it encloses a particular house and garden, and temporal because it encloses a particular interval. Protection comes from both dimensions together, never from either one alone. The last rain clings to the roof tiles, and drops fall from the eaves with slow, measured sounds. Grass remains dark and wet, holding the morning beneath its blades. Calendars rest against walls, all bearing the same date, while the clocks move with restrained persistence. A cup cools beside the fireplace, its porcelain surface reflecting a narrow line of fading light. The wooden floor gives off the quiet scent of age, though the house itself is protected from ordinary deterioration. Beyond the window, wind passes through a garden that cannot grow older, carrying the salt breath of the sea between the branches. The door waits in its frame, prepared to open onto the same morning when the cycle begins again. Around you, the refuge remains quiet, familiar, and carefully held. A sanctuary with a boundary is what the loop most truly becomes. It is not an escape from history, because history remains outside, moving through war, weather, loss, and change. It is not a limitless shelter, because its entrances can be found and its patterns studied. It is not a denial of aging, because remembered experience continues to alter those who live within it. The loop protects by placing a particular house inside a controlled temporal interval, preserving 3 September 1940 before the next day can destroy what it contains. You remain within a refuge where buildings, clothes, meals, routines, and mornings retain their condition, while memories continue to gather quietly. The protection is immense, but it is also dependent. The house remains safe only while the Ymbryne keeps its time in order, and those within its boundary understand what the repeated day asks of them. Night will eventually cover the rooms, though it will not carry them into another date. The garden will darken beneath the same sky, and rain may return to the roof before morning begins once more. A calendar will remain open at 3 September 1940, its paper pale in the dim light. The clocks will continue their patient ticking, measuring an interval that never becomes a new day. Beyond the cliffs, the sea will move through darkness, and the outside world will continue along its uncertain course. Within the house, the children will carry their memories into another repetition, bringing old knowledge to a morning that appears unchanged. Miss Peregrine's care will remain woven through the boundary, holding the refuge between one historical moment and the next. The door will open again onto that morning, and the house will wait within its protected time. You stand at the edge of the house's morning, where pale light rests upon the windows, and the familiar rooms begin their repeated work. The walls remain unchanged, yet the person who preserves their safety is never merely part of the furniture. Miss Peregrine moves through the house with the quiet authority of someone who understands every danger concealed within ordinary routines. Her care reaches beyond meals, lessons, and tidy rooms, extending into the difficult boundary between one day and another. The house's loop depends upon her continued role as caretaker, and the children's refuge endures because her extraordinary power has been shaped into an organized daily life. Within this peculiar world, an Ymbryne is not only a woman who can transform into a bird. The title identifies a social and political role, a responsibility carried among communities that depend upon careful guardianship. Warm bread lies along the center of a long table, its crust gently darkened by the oven and its interior still soft beneath the cooling air. Brass clock hands mark the morning with patient precision, while dark wood holds the faint sense of beeswax, dust, and last night's fire. Somewhere above the roofline, birdsong passes between the chimneys in small, liquid phrases, never settling into one melody for long. Near an upper window, the narrow frame catches a glimmer of movement, as though feathers have brushed the painted wood and left the smallest tremor behind. The house sounds almost asleep, although its floors receive quiet footsteps and its doors open upon rooms already prepared. You remain among these modest signs of order, sensing how domestic objects can carry a gravity greater than their size. A loaf, a clock, and a chair may belong to ordinary life, while the safety they support belongs to a far stranger history. You turn your attention from the rooms to the woman whose work makes them possible. Miss Peregrine is an Ymbryne, one of the female peculiar people able to transform themselves into birds. Her name reflects the form associated with her, for a peregrine falcon belongs to high air, speed, distance, and an exceptionally clear view of the ground below. When she takes that shape, the transformation offers practical concealment, allowing her to pass through the world as a creature ordinary observers scarcely question. It also expresses something essential about her position within the refuge. From above, a bird can survey paths, windows, gardens, and approaching figures without drawing attention to itself. Miss Peregrine's bird form therefore serves both movement and observation. You see her power as a physical change, but also as a language of watchfulness. with wings carrying her beyond the rooms and eyes, measuring the safety of the surrounding place. A feather catches against the window frame and remains there for a moment before the draft lifts it into the room. Its surface appears soft from a distance, although the individual veins possess a delicate stiffness when touched by light. Beyond the glass, the morning sky is a washed grey, and the roof tiles hold the dampness left by a quiet night. The air carries a cool mineral smell from the cliffs, balanced by the sweeter warmth of bread cooling indoors. Clock hands move across their faces with a small, nearly inaudible insistence, bronze and brass turning through the hours. From the garden, a thrush offers 3 notes, pauses, and begins again from another branch. Nothing rushes. Even the changing light seems to enter by permission, spreading across the dark wood in a slow sheet. You feel the house gathering itself around these details, as though every surface has learned to remain calm, because calmness is part of its protection. The ability to manipulate time gives an Ymbryne power over more than personal memory or a single passing moment. An Ymbryne may create a time loop, maintain one already established, and understand the dangerous limits that make such a refuge possible. The loop is not simply a machine that runs without supervision while its maker turns away. Its stability depends upon knowledge, attention, and judgment. Miss Peregrine knows the date held within the house, the length of its repetition, and the boundaries beyond which the protected moment cannot safely extend. This knowledge becomes part of the refuge's daily security. Each morning appears dependable because the caretaker understands precisely what has been fixed and what remains vulnerable. You stand within a historical moment that has been preserved, yet preservation is not passive. Behind the familiar return of daylight lies the Ymbryne's continuing labor, measured against the threats gathering beyond the loop. The long table gives back a low warmth from the kitchen, where bread has been sliced and placed beside butter, jam, and a row of cups. Linen brushes softly against the backs of chairs as the children settle into their places. The dark grain contains pale scratches from years of use, and a brass clock mounted nearby gathers a thin halo of reflected firelight. At the window, the outside world remains beyond reach, its distant movement softened by glass and weather. A gull crosses above the roofline, its wings briefly silver before disappearing behind the chimney. The scent of yeast mingles with damp wool and the faint smoke held in the curtains. Between one sound and the next, there is a pause before the caretaker gives an instruction. That silence has its own shape, neither stern nor tender, but attentive. You can feel the household waiting for the voice that will arrange the next small movement. Guardianship turns time manipulation into a social duty. An Ymbryne's work is closely tied to protecting peculiar children and preserving safe communities, so the power to hold a day in place cannot be separated from the lives sheltered inside it. Miss Peregrine must consider food, education, discipline, illness, fear, and sudden emergencies that can alter an entire household within minutes. Her authority is domestic as well as magical. She supervises the kitchen and lessons, corrects unruly behavior, settles disputes, and makes decisions when danger reaches the door. These tasks may seem ordinary when viewed separately, yet together they form the practical structure of a protected society. You witness a woman who keeps order among children while maintaining a boundary in time. The two forms of responsibility overlap constantly. A missed meal can trouble a child, while a mistaken temporal decision can endanger everyone beneath the roof. Outside, the wind moves along the house with soft pressure, testing the seams around the windows and stirring ivy against the stone. Within the dining room, the bread remains warm enough to release a faint buttery fragrance when broken apart. The plates are cool beneath your hands, and the table's polished surface reflects blurred shapes of cups, sleeves, and brass. From somewhere high above, a few feathers scrape lightly across a frame, producing a dry whisper quickly lost beneath the roof's creaks. Birds call from the far side of the garden, their voices appearing distant and close at once. The clocks continue with differing textures, one producing a delicate tick, while another gives a deeper wooden click. Light enters through a narrow gap in the curtains and settles upon the floorboards. You remain in that quiet interior, where the smallest household sound seems connected to a wider system of shelter and watchfulness. The children's safety is presented as a collective responsibility, yet the Ymbryne bears unusual responsibility for the loop itself. Everyone contributes to the life of the house through cooperation, affection, caution, and acceptance of shared rules. Even so, the caretaker alone carries the fullest knowledge of the temporal enclosure and its limits. She must know when the loop begins, when it closes, and what consequences follow from every attempt to alter its pattern. The children inhabit the protected date as residents, while Miss Peregrine also inhabits it as its keeper. Her position requires her to understand the refuge from within and beyond, holding the experience of a child's mourning alongside the calculations of a temporal guardian. You sense the difference in the way she watches a clock, studies a doorway, or considers an unexpected sound. Her attention is never reduced to suspicion, because protection includes knowing when ordinary life may continue without interruption. A stripe of sunlight reaches across the floor, though the morning remains cool beyond the glass. Dust moves through the bright section in slow, uneven spirals, rising and sinking as the house breathes through its old timber. The window latch is cold, while the frame has been warmed by years of touch and passing seasons. Bread crumbs rest near the edge of a plate, and a knife carries the muted shine of the surrounding brass. Above the roof, birdsong gathers briefly, with one clear note answered by another from the cliffs. In the room's deeper shadows, the wood appears almost black, absorbing the pale light without losing its smoothness. You hear the scrape of a chair and the soft folding of a sleeve. The air holds a trace of rain, yet the fire has kept the interior dry. Every sensation remains small and precise, enclosed by a house whose safety relies upon measured repetition. The name Miss Peregrine carries the memory of wings even when she stands in the hall with one hand resting upon a banister. A peregrine falcon belongs to open height, but her role requires her to remain close to the lives gathered below. The contrast gives her character a particular balance. She can rise above the house, cross the air, and observe the surrounding land, then return to supervise a lesson or settle an argument over breakfast. Her transformation connects her symbolically to movement, height, and observation, while her daily duties bind those qualities to a fixed community. You see the bird and the caretaker as two aspects of one responsibility. Flight provides distance, concealment, and perspective. The household requires presence, patience, and repeated attention. Miss Peregrine must therefore move between the vastness of the sky and the narrow demands of a dining room, carrying the knowledge of both into every decision. The garden lies under a veil of moisture, with leaves holding round beads of water along their edges. A faint breeze brings the clean smell of stone and grass through a loosened casement, while the kitchen offers a warmer current scented with flour and toasted crust. Feathers drift above the roof line, appearing and vanishing between the chimneys as birds pass through the pale air. Their calls are softened by distance, yet the rhythm remains distinct against the quiet ticking indoors. A brass clock catches the reflection of a moving branch and seems, for a second, to contain its own weather. The dark wood around the window is smooth where hands have rested over many years. Beneath the ordinary hush, the house keeps a deeper silence, the silence of a boundary carefully placed around it. You stand within that stillness and feel how observation may become a form of shelter. The peculiar society includes other Ymbrynes beyond Miss Peregrine, widening the system beyond one house and one caretaker. Their work belongs to a broader network of protection, organization, and political responsibility within the peculiar world. Some maintain loops, some guide communities, and some carry knowledge between isolated refuges that could not safely exist without coordination. The word Ymbryne, therefore, names a social office as much as a peculiar ability. It identifies women whose transformations allow unusual forms of travel and concealment, but whose lasting importance lies in the communities they organize. You imagine distant houses, hidden islands, quiet villages, and sheltered children whose safety depends upon similar decisions elsewhere. Miss Peregrine's authority is intimate because the house is intimate, yet it is also part of a larger structure. Her daily care belongs to a world where survival requires cooperation across temporal boundaries. On the roof, the wind has freshened enough to move a loose feather along the gutter. It travels a short distance, stops against a ridge of moss, and remains there beneath a thin glaze of water. Inside, the clocks make a subdued pattern over the sound of the fire, with brass hands advancing through the same patient circles. The table is still marked by warmth from the bread, and the smell of baked grain lingers beneath the sharper scent of polish. Birds gather briefly above the eaves, their wings stirring the damp air before settling somewhere hidden. A curtain shifts near the window, allowing a narrow blade of grey daylight to touch the floor. You hear no command, yet the room carries the expectation of one. Even quietness seems arranged here, with nothing allowed to become careless. The Ymbryne's powers combine practical guardianship with the management of dangerous temporal boundaries. A loop can shelter peculiar children from hostile forces, but it can also isolate them, narrow their choices, and demand sacrifices from the person who maintains it. Miss Peregrine must preserve the refuge without allowing preservation to become neglect. She must recognize the point at which secure repetition becomes a prison and the moment when interruption becomes necessary for survival. Such decisions cannot be made by instinct alone. They require memory, knowledge of history, awareness of the loop's date, and a sober understanding of what lies beyond its limits. You encounter the temporal boundary not as an abstract line, but as a responsibility carried through each day. The caretaker's power has meaning because it is directed towards other lives. Without judgment, time could be folded into confusion. With judgment, it becomes a shelter that can be inhabited. The house grows warmer as the fire settles into a bed of glowing coals. Along the long table, the bread gives off a softer fragrance now, mingled with tea, wool, and the faint sweetness of preserved fruit. The brass clock hands have advanced, though the movement is too small to see directly. A bird calls from the chimney, then another answers from the far roof, creating a conversation above the ceiling. Near the window, the frame bears a faint mark where feathers may have passed, a small sign of contact between the household and the air. Dark wood absorbs the shifting firelight, showing amber only along its polished edges. You can hear the floorboards respond to a careful step in the corridor. The room is neither empty nor crowded, because every object has been placed for use and every sound has a place within the morning. The refuge feels less like a fortress than a household trained to remain ready. Miss Peregrine's domestic authority becomes clearest when ordinary problems arise. A child may need correction, a lesson may require changing, an argument may threaten the calm of the table, or an unexpected message may arrive from beyond the grounds. Each matter asks for a different response, yet all belong to the same work of keeping a community safe. The caretaker's instruction must be firm without becoming cruel, and her decisions must account for immediate feelings as well as wider consequences. You watch her move through these situations with the same attention she gives to a dangerous boundary. Food must be served, lessons must continue, discipline must be understood, and emergency choices must be made before fear spreads through the rooms. The magical and the mundane are not separate duties. In Miss Peregrine's house, protection of time is sustained through protection of daily life. Rain begins again beyond the glass, falling so lightly that it first appears only as darkening marks upon the stone. The roof receives the drops in a scattered pattern, while the fire answers with a low shift of sparks. A faint scent of wet feathers enters through the narrowest opening, joined by the richer aroma of bread and hot tea. Along the ceiling, birdsong fades into the weather, leaving only a few thin notes above the roofline. The window frame feels rough beneath your fingertips where old paint has lifted in tiny curls. Brass catches the dim light and returns it in small, dull flashes. The long table has cooled in some places and remains warm in others, according to where bread and cups have stood. You hear the distant movement of a door, followed by stillness. The house seems to hold its breath, not from fear, but from the concentration required to continue safely. A loop's apparent simplicity conceals the knowledge needed to maintain it. To the children, the repeated mourning may appear almost natural, as though the day has always belonged to the house and will always return. Miss Peregrine knows that the repetition has a beginning, a duration, and a fragile relationship with the outside world. She knows how weather enters the loop, how memory behaves within it, and how danger may press against its edges. Her work is partly the preservation of a date, and partly the interpretation of everything that occurs inside it. You begin to see why an Ymbryne cannot simply establish a refuge and abandon it. The loop must be observed, repaired, and defended through changing circumstances. Each return confirms not only that time has repeated, but that someone has judged the repetition safe enough to continue. The morning is therefore an achievement renewed in silence. The rain leaves a dark sheen on the window ledge, where one pale feather has come to rest beside a brass ornament. Its fibers cling together beneath the moisture, and a single drop travels slowly towards the pointed end. From the kitchen, a knife touches a board with a gentle, regular sound, while the fire settles lower in the grate. Bread remains on the table beneath a folded cloth, retaining a little warmth beneath its rough weave. Outside, birds shift along the roof tiles, their claws producing tiny taps that vanish beneath the rainfall. The dark wood smells faintly of resin as the room warms, and the brass clock hands continue their measured progress. You stand near the threshold and notice the quiet interval in which attention gathers around one person. Such a pause can be heavier than noise because it contains the next decision before it has been spoken. The broader network of Ymbrynes gives the peculiar world a form of continuity that one refuge alone could never provide. Their communities may be separated by distance, secrecy, and the different histories contained within their loops, yet the same principles guide their work. They guard children, preserve knowledge, organize shelter, and manage boundaries where ordinary time can no longer be trusted. Their bird transformations allow them to travel discreetly, watch from above, and carry messages through places where a human figure would attract attention. You imagine an Ymbryne crossing a moonlit coast as a small dark shape, then returning to a hidden room where maps and clocks wait upon a table. This belongs to Riggs's fantasy setting rather than to folklore about shape-shifting women. Here, transformation is part of a defined, peculiar society, and the title Ymbryne carries an organized political meaning. The coast beyond the house is blurred by rain, with the cliffs appearing as dark masses beneath a low sky. Water gathers on the window and distorts the roofline until the chimney seems to sway gently in the distance. Inside, the long table remains steady beneath its cloth, and the bread's warmth has become only a memory held in the grain. The clocks speak more clearly now, their brass hands advancing through the softened light. Feathers stir above the roof, though the birds themselves remain hidden from view. A quiet smell of wet earth moves through the corridor, meeting the dry scent of wood and ash. You hear the house settling at its joints, a low complaint beneath the floorboards. The silence between outside uncertainty and indoor order seems to wait at the boundary. Even the rain appears to pause there. The 2016 film presents Miss Peregrine as a central guardian figure, played by Eva Green, whose presence gives the caretaker a striking visual form. Eva Green was born in Paris on 6 July 1980 and became internationally known through roles including Vesper Lind in Casino Royale, released in 2006. The film adaptation appeared in 2016, while Ransom Riggs's original novel was published in 2011. These dates belong to the character's movement between page and screen, allowing Miss Peregrine to be encountered through different forms of imagination. You remain within the house as the film's image and the novel's description overlap, remembering that the Ymbrynes system belongs to Riggs's fantasy setting. The character is not drawn from a general folklore tradition of shape-shifting women. Her bird form, temporal authority, and political position arise from the peculiar world built around the children and their refuges. A thin grey brightness lies over the room, and the brass clock faces appear almost colourless until the fire gives them a sudden amber edge. The long table has been wiped clean, though a few crumbs remain lodged between its boards. Warm bread is replaced by the quieter scents of tea leaves, damp cloth, and cooling ash. Outside, birdsong returns in a subdued fragment, rising above the roofline and dissolving into the wet air. A feather touches the window frame from the other side, flickers once, and disappears downwards. The glass is cold enough to draw warmth from your palm, while the dark wood beside it feels familiar and dry. Somewhere in the house, a child moves quickly and then stops. The silence after that movement becomes attentive, almost ceremonial. You remain among these small signs, sensing that ordinary comfort and careful surveillance can occupy the same room without conflict. Miss Peregrine's authority does not depend solely upon the power to become a peregrine falcon or manipulate time. It depends upon the trust created when unusual abilities are placed in service of other people. The children must accept her rules because the house cannot remain safe without them, while she must understand the fears and limitations that make those rules difficult. Her position is therefore both political and intimate. She governs a small community, but also notices who is hungry, frightened, sleepless, or in need of a lesson repeated with greater patience. You see the caretaker's extraordinary work expressed through countless modest gestures. A hand closes a door, a meal is divided, a clock is checked, and an instruction is given at precisely the right moment. These actions preserve more than comfort. They protect the conditions under which the children can grow inside a world that has made ordinary safety impossible. Moisture beads upon the window's lower edge, catching the dim outline of the room in broken pieces. The clock hands move over their numbered faces, dark against brass, while the cases hold a faint smell of old varnish. Bread has left warmth in the table's center, and the cloth covering the remaining slices feels slightly coarse beneath your fingers. Above the roof, the birds remain unseen, but their calls pass through the rain like threads drawn from one chimney to another. A small current lifts the curtain and lets cool air touch your cheek. Feathers whisper along the frame, so softly that the sound might belong to fabric or leaves. The dark wood gives back a muted glow from the fire, showing every worn edge where generations of hands have rested. You hear a pause in the corridor, then a calm voice beginning an instruction. The house's loop survives because Miss Peregrine continues to perform the role of caretaker, not because time has become obedient once and for all. Her work must be renewed through observation, calculation, and the willingness to act when circumstances change. If she neglected the date or misunderstood its limits, the refuge could become exposed to the dangers it was designed to resist. If she treated the children as pieces within a mechanism, the protection would lose its human purpose. You understand the loop more clearly when you place these responsibilities together. It is a temporal structure maintained for a community, and a community sustained through that structure. The Ymbryne stands at the center of the relationship, carrying knowledge no child can fully share. Every repeated morning bears the trace of her judgment, even when the children notice only familiar light and the ordinary arrangement of breakfast. The fire has settled into a red glow, and its remaining warmth travels slowly across the dark wood of the room. Rainwater moves in narrow paths down the glass, altering the view of the cliffs with every new line. Above the roofline, a bird beats its wings once and vanishes behind the chimney, leaving the air briefly disturbed. The smell of bread has softened into something faint and comforting, joined by polished brass and old timber. A clock gives one deeper click, then resumes its smaller rhythm. The window frame is marked by a pale curve where a feather has dragged across the paint. You hear the distant murmur of children and the quiet movement of crockery. Before the caretaker speaks, a measured chamber of silence gathers the whole room. You remain within it, sheltered by labor that is almost invisible because it has been performed so carefully. The Ymbryne's duty reaches beyond a single loop because peculiar children require communities capable of lasting through danger. A refuge cannot be defined only by its walls or by the date held within its boundary. It also includes the rules that shape conduct, the lessons that preserve memory, and the relationships that allow frightened people to rely upon one another. Miss Peregrine organizes these elements through authority, patience, and vigilance. You see her work extending from the kitchen to the classroom, from the garden gate to the edge of time itself. Other Ymbrynes perform similar tasks in other places, creating a dispersed system of guardianship across the peculiar world. Their shared title indicates a common office, while each caretaker adapts that office to the needs of a particular community. Time is managed not for its own sake, but for the people whose lives depend upon safe continuity. A clearer patch of sky appears above the cliffs, though the stones remain wet and dark beneath it. The roof tiles gleam faintly, and drops fall from the eaves in a slow sequence that never quite becomes a rhythm. Birds call from the chimney pots, one voice high and thin, another lower and more distant. The table has cooled completely, yet the room retains the fragrance of warm bread in its folds and grain. Brass hands continue to move, their shadows advancing across the clock faces with patient inevitability. The wood beneath your hand carries a shallow groove made by an earlier tool, smoothed by years of contact. A feather rests beside the window latch, dry now at its edges. You hear a chair draw back, followed by the soft placement of a cup. The house remains composed, with each sound entering and leaving as though expected. The image of Miss Peregrine as a falcon allows her to be understood through the qualities of the bird without reducing her to them. Height gives perspective, movement provides access, and observation offers warning, yet none can replace the knowledge required to care for children. The Ymbryne must return from the sky to the room, from the wide view to the individual face, and from danger beyond the boundary to the lesson waiting at a desk. You see how her authority is completed by this return. Flight may reveal an approaching threat, but domestic attention decides how the household will respond. A warning must become an instruction, and an instruction must become shared action. The bird form provides concealment and reach. The caretaker's role gives those abilities purpose, turning an extraordinary nature into an organized form of protection. Sunlight rests briefly upon the window frame, revealing old brush marks beneath the paint. The brass clock hands gleam like narrow strokes of fire, while the dark wood around them remains deep and cool. A dry feather trembles near the latch as air passes through the room, lifting its edge but not carrying it away. From beyond the roofline comes a scattered chorus of birds, softened by distance and the dampness of morning. The long table holds a few empty cups, and its surface retains a faint scent of crust, butter, and beeswax. The house makes small noises as it adjusts to warmth, with one board answering another below your feet. Before anyone speaks, the familiar pause gathers once more. It is not an interruption in the day, but the space in which care becomes deliberate, and the next action arrives without haste. The title Ymbryne carries a weight that can be missed if treated as a simple name for a magical talent. It identifies women who belong to a particular social order, whose abilities have been given public purpose through guardianship and organization. Their work includes creating and maintaining loops, preserving knowledge, coordinating communities, and protecting children who cannot safely remain in ordinary time. You stand within Miss Peregrine's house and glimpse the larger system through the way she acts. Her decisions are local, yet their meaning is shared by other Ymbrynes elsewhere. Each refuge becomes a small expression of wider political responsibility. The peculiar world survives not because power exists, but because power is administered through rules, memory, and care. In that sense, the Ymbryne is both keeper of time and keeper of society. The weather has thinned to a cool mist, leaving the air clean around the house. Roof tiles release their last drops, and the birds above the chimneys begin to sing with greater confidence. Feather slides across the window frame and rests against the brass latch, its pale surface catching the muted daylight. The dark wood has dried to a quiet satin, and the long table seems to hold the morning in its polished grain. Bread crumbs remain in a corner, small and harmless beneath the shadow of a cup. Clock hands continue their slow passage, almost too subtly to distinguish from stillness. You hear the distant scrape of a broom and the faint murmur of a lesson being prepared. Attention gathers gently around the caretaker before her next instruction. Around you, the house does not hurry. It simply prepares to remain safe for another measured span of time. The story's understanding of Miss Peregrine rests upon the belief that shelter must be actively made. A house may possess thick walls, hidden rooms, and a protected date, but none guarantees safety without someone capable of reading conditions and responding to them. The Ymbryne's knowledge of the loop becomes part of the refuge's daily rhythm, as necessary as breakfast or schoolwork. You move through the repeated morning aware that its sameness has been examined and chosen. The caretaker has judged the boundary stable, the household prepared, and the children secure enough to continue. Yet her duty does not become lighter because the same day returns. Repetition multiplies responsibility, since every cycle asks for renewed attention. The loop is maintained through labor, judgment, and vigilance, even when its success makes that labor almost impossible to see. The room carries the gentle warmth of the late fire, while the windows show a pale sky opening beyond the cliffs. Birds move along the roofline in brief shadows, their feathers brushing tiles and frames as they search for a dry place. The brass clock hands have advanced again, marking a morning that feels both present and familiar. The long table is clean, though its boards remember the heat of bread and the touch of many hands. Dark wood surrounds the room with a steady, enclosed smell, softened by tea and the faint mineral dampness of stone. A single call rises above the roof, pauses, and is answered from somewhere beyond the garden. You hear footsteps approaching, then slowing before the door. In the stillness that follows, the whole house seems to wait with quiet respect. The next instruction will shape only a small moment, yet small moments are how a refuge continues. You remain inside the protected day as Miss Peregrine carries the weight of its continuation. Her peregrine form belongs to the open sky, while her daily authority belongs to kitchens, classrooms, corridors, and the careful arrangement of children around a long table. The two aspects meet in the work of guardianship. She watches from above, understands the boundaries of time, and returns to intimate decisions that keep a community human. Other Ymbrynes extend this responsibility beyond the house, creating a network of caretakers whose social and political role belongs to Ransom Riggs's peculiar world. The 2011 novel and the 2016 film offer different doors into that world, with Eva Green's performance placing Miss Peregrine at its center on screen. Yet beneath every version remains the same quiet principle. An extraordinary power becomes a refuge only when an individual turns it into organized daily life. Outside, the air has become nearly still, and the last dampness shines along the stone paths. Birds circle above the roofline, their wings dark against the clearing sky, then settle beyond the chimneys where their calls become soft and intermittent. The window frame is dry beneath your hand, though one loose feather remains caught in its corner. Brass clock hands move through the familiar hour, slender and unwavering. The long table gives off the sense of wood, cloth, and the bread that was warm there earlier. Light reaches farther into the room now, touching the floorboards and the polished edge of a chair. You hear the low turn of a page, the careful placement of a cup, and the small breath before a voice begins. The house holds its silence without emptiness. Its calm has been built from repeated acts of attention, and each act leaves the morning more secure than it found it. The day seems ready to repeat itself, but the repetition is not empty. Beneath the unchanged light, Miss Peregrine's labor continues through every clock she checks, every rule she explains, every child she protects, and every danger she measures against the loop's limits. You understand that the refuge remains between one historical moment and the next, because an Ymbryne keeps choosing care. Her bird transformation grants height, movement, concealment, and observation, while her office gives those abilities purpose. The loop shelters the house, but the caretaker sustains the life within it. Across the peculiar world, other Ymbrynes carry related duties, ensuring that the system reaches beyond one guardian and one family of children. In the quiet of this protected morning, the house does not turn by itself. It is held in motion by knowledge, judgment, and vigilance, until another dawn can arrive with the appearance of having always been there. You are standing in the passage outside the kitchen while the house begins another morning, and the floorboards answer each careful footstep with a muted, familiar creak. Beyond the closed door, crockery touches wood, a kettle breathes over the range, and Miss Peregrine's household gathers according to an order repeated so often that every movement seems quietly rehearsed. The children's day follows a fixed sequence because the house remains inside the same loop, and the date cannot advance beyond the morning already appointed for it. Breakfast comes first, followed by dressing, lessons, a walk, and the gradual return towards supper. These activities are not merely chores arranged for convenience, but temporal landmarks in a world without tomorrow. Meals divide the morning from the afternoon, lessons give shape to the hours, and household rules prevent extraordinary abilities from becoming ordinary dangers. Jacob, raised among the unremarkable rhythms of a modern family, is still learning that peculiar life is governed by manners and routines as much as by magic. The kitchen carries a warmth gathered from brick, iron, and many quiet fires. Apple skins curl beside a wooden board, their pale edges shining where a knife has passed through them, while coal smoke rests lightly beneath the rafters. A little dampness has entered from the garden, bringing the dark scent of soil and leaves into the room. Sunlight lies across the table in narrow bands, touching spoons, chipped bowls, and the worn grain of the chairs. Somewhere behind the pantry wall, bees hum with a patient vibration, as though a small engine has been placed among the plaster. A balloon rises near the ceiling and pulls against a length of string, while a weight at its other end tugs downward with equal persistence. The motion is gentle, yet it reminds the room of opposing forces, of things that float and things that must be fastened. Near the hearth, an empty chair receives a pool of lamplight left over from the earlier darkness. Breakfast is served with the calm precision of an established ceremony. You watch Miss Peregrine place plates before the children, naming each portion and correcting small breaches of conduct before they grow into larger disturbances. Emma Bloom must remain weighted down when she sits, because she is lighter than air when nothing anchors her to the floor. Her shoes and the discrete weights attached to them turn an impossible condition into a practical domestic arrangement, much as a napkin protects a sleeve or a lid keeps dust from a pot. Oliver Brohelow's Elephanta wears weighted shoes for the same reason, although her levitation makes her movements more difficult to conceal. Without them, Olive could rise towards the beams while carrying a cup, or drift beyond the table when reaching for bread. Enoch O'Connor waits until the meal is finished before attending to his own peculiar work, since animating the dead or recently dead is not considered suitable company for porridge. The windows are clouded at their lower edges, and the morning beyond them appears softened by moisture. Droplets gather along the glass and descend in slow, uneven paths, joining one another before disappearing into the wooden frame. A spoon leaves a bright curve of reflected light across the table, and the warmth from the kettle makes the air above it tremble. The bread has a dry, comforting scent, mixed with apple, ash, and the faint sweetness of preserves. You hear the brush of fabric whenever someone shifts upon a chair, followed by the subdued creak of floorboards beneath careful feet. Above the cupboard, a balloon leans towards the ceiling, its string angled beneath the tug of a weight. Behind the wall, the bees continue their low humming, never loud enough to dominate the room, yet present enough to become part of its ordinary silence. Jacob begins to understand that each peculiar ability has a place within the household, and that place is determined by use, danger, and courtesy. Bronwyn Bruntley's extraordinary strength allows her to lift a heavy table without assistance, but she must remember that a wooden chair can break beneath the same careless pressure used to move a stone. Millard Nullings, being invisible, leaves his clothing and household objects to reveal where he is. A napkin folded in midair, a door opening without a visible hand, or a book sliding from a shelf becomes a polite indication of Millard's presence. Fiona Fraunfeld can influence and accelerate plant growth, which is valuable in the garden, although a vine encouraged too quickly may cover a path or press through a window. Hugh Apiston carries a swarm of bees within his body in the novel's peculiar world premise, and the walls sometimes hum because his companions are resting nearby. What appears miraculous from outside becomes, indoors, a question of seating, storage, timing, and good manners. The light strengthens gradually, though it never seems to travel far from the house before becoming silver and diffuse. Moisture clings to the window panes, and the garden beyond them remains a composition of green shadows, brown earth, and pale branches. The flagstones near the back door hold a darkness left by the night, while the threshold has been worn smooth by generations of returning feet. A folded cloth hangs beside the range, carrying the warm smell of flour and smoke. From the corridor comes a hollow knock, followed by the faint movement of something invisible passing close to the wall. The sensation is not alarming, because the house has learned to read these small signs. Clothing, footsteps, displaced air, and the lightest touch upon a latch form a quiet language shared by everyone within the loop. Once breakfast has ended, the children disperse towards their rooms to dress, and the house enters its second familiar movement. You follow the corridor slowly, feeling the floorboards give beneath your steps as doors open and close in an order that seems to belong to the architecture itself. Emma Bloom exchanges one weighted garment for another, ensuring that her gift for controlling air will not carry her into the rafters while she crosses the landing. Oliver Brohelow's Elephanta checks the straps on her weighted shoes before descending the stairs, because the household has learned that even a short flight requires gravity to be treated with care. Millard Nullings leaves his clothes upon a hook, and the empty space beneath them marks the shape of a person who cannot be seen. Jacob watches these preparations with the puzzled attention of someone accustomed to regarding clothing as decoration rather than evidence. Here, a coat may announce a visitor, a pair of shoes may prevent an accident, and a hat may hover above an invisible head. Cool air moves through the upper passage where the windows have been opened a little. It carries the scent of wet hedges and distant earth, while the rooms retain the softer smells of soap, wool, and last night's fire. Fabric brushes against polished banisters, and buckles make small metallic sounds as they are fastened. A shoe placed carefully upon the floor creates a firm, reassuring thud, followed by the lighter tap of another pair crossing the boards. Somewhere above, a balloon strains against its cord and rises until the string trembles. At the end of the passage, lamplight still rests on an empty chair, giving the impression that someone has only just left it. The chair remains ordinary, yet its emptiness becomes part of the household's vocabulary, like a silence understood by people who have lived together for years. Lessons begin after dressing, and Miss Peregrine uses them to turn the morning's unusual circumstances into habits that can be practiced and remembered. You sit with Jacob and the others in a room where maps, books, slate boards, and carefully arranged chairs make the impossible appear almost scholarly. The children learn history, language, arithmetic, and the rules governing their own peculiar abilities. Lessons and rules help them live together despite powers that could easily cause accidents, because knowledge is safer when repeated until it becomes instinct. Bronwyn must judge the strength required to lift a desk without splintering its legs. Emma must understand how air moves through a room before she attempts to guide it. Olive learns to remain grounded even when the urge to rise comes naturally. Enoch keeps his animated creations confined to approved hours and suitable places. Jacob, who has known only ordinary classrooms, discovers that discipline is not opposed to wonder. It is what allows wonder to remain peaceful. Dust moves through the sunlight in slow, uncertain patterns, each particle turning briefly bright before vanishing into the dimness above the desk. The ink has a faint iron smell, and the slate boards carry the dry residue of chalk beneath the children's fingers. Pages lift whenever Emma alters the air, then settle after a quiet correction from Miss Peregrine. The movement is no more dramatic than a curtain stirred by a passing breeze, yet everyone watches it closely. You hear a pencil roll across the table and stop against a book, followed by the faint scrape of a chair being drawn back into place. Outside, water drips from a gutter with measured patience. Within the room, the house breathes through timber, plaster, cloth, and paper, making the lesson feel held inside a larger body that has learned to remain still. The practical complications of the children's gifts emerge most clearly when ordinary tasks are attempted together. A lesson involving plants requires Fiona Fraunfeld to restrain her influence, since a seedling can become a tangled stem before the exercise has been completed. Hugh Apiston must keep his bees settled, especially when the windows are closed and warmth gathers beneath the ceiling. A sudden disturbance may send the swarm searching through the room, turning a simple reading exercise into a careful negotiation with wings and stings. Millard Nullings cannot be asked to stand at the front of the class without some visible marker, so a coat or hat takes his place. Enoch's talent is useful for demonstrating the difference between movement and life, though Miss Peregrine maintains firm limits around anything recently dead. These abilities create advantages, but they also require rituals, and a repeated day gives the household time to develop them until they feel as natural as setting a table. The classroom grows warmer as the morning continues. Coal smoke drifts beneath the door in thin, softened traces, mixing with the green smell of damp soil from the garden below. The wooden desks have smooth edges where hands have rested through countless lessons, and shallow marks remain from old compasses, ink bottles, and restless pencils. A bee touches the glass and moves along it, its body dark against the pale morning. The sound of its wings is delicate, almost private, while the larger swarm behind the wall answers with a lower note. A breeze passes through the room and lifts one corner of a worksheet. The paper trembles, then lies flat again. In the quiet, even the house's small imperfections become familiar. A nail working loose, a board answering weight, a hinge settling after the door has closed. By the time lessons are complete, the children are ready for the garden, and the walk becomes another marker in the day. You step outside with them onto ground softened by rain, while Miss Peregrine watches from the path and reminds everyone of the boundaries of the grounds. The children move according to rules established through repetition. Emma keeps her weight secured. Olive watches the firmness of each step, and Bronwyn takes the heavier garden tools without being asked. Fiona approaches the beds with careful restraint, encouraging only the growth required for the day's work. Hugh remains close enough to the house that his bees can settle without troubling the others. Millard's unseen presence is traced by a coat moving through the hedges and by leaves bending where no body appears. Jacob follows among them, learning that peculiar life is not a succession of spectacles, but a series of small courtesies performed correctly. The garden retains the night's moisture in every surface. Mud gathers around the soles of the weighted shoes, and water trembles on the broad leaves of the cabbages. Apple skins lie in a shallow basket near the kitchen door, their red and green surfaces bright against the dark wicker. The scent of damp soil rises whenever a spade enters the earth, carrying the cool mineral smell of roots and buried stones. Bees hum behind the wall, and a few drift through the air above the flowers before returning towards Hugh. Wind passes over the grass with a soft, continuous movement, bending the blades in one direction and then another. You feel the floorboards inside the house through the soles of your shoes when you briefly step back across the threshold, and the familiar wood gives the garden's uncertainty a measure of steadiness. The garden teaches Jacob how the children's powers can become useful without losing their strangeness. Bronwyn bluntly moves a fallen branch that would require several ordinary adults, placing it beside the shed with extraordinary strength and surprising delicacy. Fiona Fraunfeld lays her hand near a drooping plant, and its leaves slowly recover, opening towards the weak daylight. Emma Bloom gathers air beneath a sheet of canvas, guiding it over a line of damp clothing so that the fabric dries more quickly. Oliver Brohelow's Elephanta rises briefly when one weighted shoe slips in the mud, then settles once the strap is secured. Millard Nullings carries a basket that seems to travel by itself along the path. Hugh Apiston listens to the changing hum within him and chooses the sheltered side of the garden. Jacob sees that the impossible can be domestic, and that a gift may serve as both labor and responsibility. Cloud moves across the sky, leaving the garden to alternate between dimness and a brief, tender brightness. The branches make a dry whisper above you, while droplets fall from them with irregular taps upon the leaves. A spade rests against the shed, its handle darkened by damp hands, and the soil beside it holds the clean smell of turned earth. The apple skins in the kitchen basket have begun to curl more tightly as the air dries. Near the wall, the bees create a continuous vibration that seems to belong equally to insect, brick, and weather. A balloon, visible through the upper window, lifts and dips as the tug of its weight responds to the breeze. Every object appears to possess a modest motion, yet nothing truly advances, and the garden remains held in the same season as the morning before. At midday, the children return indoors for the meal that divides lessons from the afternoon walk. You notice how the household's rules accompany them across the threshold because muddy shoes are removed, weights are checked, and invisible companions are given room to pass. Miss Peregrine does not need to raise her voice. Her authority has been woven into the repeated structure of the house, and the children recognize each instruction before it is fully spoken. Jacob sits among them and learns where to place his elbows, which cupboard may be opened, and why certain doors remain closed. The daily rhythm makes even dangerous abilities feel manageable, provided that each person accepts the limits required by the others. In this refuge, calm depends partly on turning extraordinary powers into familiar habits, until a levitating child is treated with the same practical concern as a child carrying a hot bowl. Rain begins against the windows while the meal is being served, making a fine pattern upon the glass. The room grows dim, and lamplight gathers over the table in soft yellow pools. Steam rises from the food, carrying the scent of herbs, warm bread, and coal smoke. Wet coats hang in the passage, releasing a faint smell of wool and garden leaves. Somewhere within the walls, bees hum steadily, sheltered from the weather. A chair shifts without a visible occupant, its legs making a brief complaint against the floor. On the table, a spoon reflects the lamps in a narrow line, and a drop of water slides from a sleeve onto the wood. The house holds each sound separately, then gathers them into one quiet domestic murmur. After the meal, the children walk beyond the garden while the rain weakens into a silver mist. You follow the path through trees that have reached the same condition again and again, their leaves never quite permitted to fall into a different season. The repetition gives the children time to practice living together, but it does not allow them to mature through ordinary calendar years. They can improve their manners, their control, and their understanding of one another, yet the loop prevents the gradual passage that would ordinarily carry them from childhood towards adulthood. Jacob begins to sense the sadness beneath the comfort. A day repeated can become a shelter, but it can also become a room without a farther door. The children know how the next morning will look because it will resemble this one, beneath the same unadvancing date. Mist settles upon the branches and softens the edges of the path. Your shoes press into wet leaves, producing a muted sound that disappears almost as soon as it is made. The cold air moves across your face, carrying the smell of bark, rain, and dark soil. Water gathers along a fern and drops onto the ground with a small, bright tap. Behind you, the house appears through the trees as a pale shape, its windows holding faint rectangles of yellow light. The forest does not seem empty, although its sounds are subdued. A distant bird, a branch adjusting under moisture, and the low murmur of bees returning towards the walls. The air feels clean enough to drink, and the damp fabric at your sleeve grows cool against your skin. Jacob's ordinary upbringing leaves him unprepared for a household where the impossible is routine, and his first instinct is to look for explanations belonging to the world outside the loop. He expects astonishment to be the proper response to levitation, invisible people, animated bodies, and bees carried within a human form. The children, however, are more concerned with whether a door has been left open or whether someone has taken the wrong coat. Their manners have grown around their peculiarities. Jacob gradually follows their example, offering space when Emma needs to remain anchored, listening for Millard before crossing a room, and accepting that Enoch's talent requires both caution and trust. Magic becomes less frightening when it is placed beside breakfast, homework, wet boots, and the ordinary expectation that everyone should return before supper. Evening gathers early beneath the clouds, and the house receives the children with a warmth that seems deeper after the wet walk. The floorboards beneath careful footsteps carry the familiar sounds of return. Boots removed, coats shaken, doors closed, and voices lowered near the study. Lamplight rests on an empty chair beside the hearth, illuminating its curved arms and the small hollow made by years of use. Coal smoke rises into the darker part of the room, meeting the scents of apple skins, wool, and damp soil. Behind the wall, the bees hum with patient steadiness. A balloon floats near the ceiling while its weight pulls against the string below, and the two opposing motions continue without resolution. Nothing in the room is grand, yet each object seems placed within a pattern that the household knows by heart. Supper follows the walk, and then the children return to the smaller duties that close the day. You watch them replace books, dry shoes, secure weights, close shutters, and check the rooms where peculiar abilities might cause trouble overnight. Bronwyn returns a heavy object to its proper place without damaging the furniture. Fiona inspects the plants near the windows, ensuring that their accelerated growth has not pressed against the glass. Hugh settles his bees before the lamps are lowered, and the hum behind the wall becomes quieter. Millard's clothing is hung upon its hook, marking the place where an invisible child has gone to rest. Enoch leaves his workroom at the agreed hour. The household has converted danger into procedure and procedure into reassurance. These rituals do not diminish the children's abilities. They make shared life possible around them. Rain has stopped, leaving the windows black and reflective. The lamps shine upon the glass and return as small floating shapes, while the fire sends a slow warmth across the room. Wet leaves glisten beyond the panes, and the garden has become a dark arrangement of stems, stones, and shining paths. The scent of coal smoke rests near the ceiling, while damp soil lingers at the threshold. A polished shoe reflects a thin line of gold before disappearing beneath a chair. The floorboards answer each passing step with familiar notes, some low and resonant, others dry and delicate. Beside the hearth, the empty chair remains within the lamplight, holding no one and yet belonging unmistakably to the household. Miss Peregrine's authority is most visible when the children are tired, because tiredness makes peculiar abilities less predictable. The rules must then be followed with particular care. Emma does not drift near the lamps. Olive keeps both weighted shoes fastened, and Hugh remains away from open food until the bees have settled. Millard announces his movements by touching a wall or leaving an object in view. Bronwyn handles the doors slowly, while Fiona avoids the plants that respond eagerly to the slightest attention. Enoch closes the cabinet where his carefully animated materials are kept. Jacob sees that these restrictions are not punishments, but forms of mutual consideration. The refuge remains calm because everyone accepts that freedom within a shared house requires boundaries, even when its residents possess abilities that would seem impossible elsewhere. The fire has burned lower, and the room is filled with a softer, more reddish light. Ash settles upon the grate, making a faint, powdery sound whenever a coal shifts. The wooden arms of the empty chair are warm to the touch, while the floor near the windows remains cool from the stopped rain. Curtains hang heavily, carrying a trace of damp air at their lower edges. Behind the plaster, the bees have become almost silent, their former humming reduced to a vibration felt more than heard. You hear a floorboard creak in an upstairs room, followed by the gentle closing of a door. The house does not sleep all at once. It settles in stages, each part yielding gradually to darkness. As the children retire, the same sequence that began at breakfast starts to fold back upon itself. You remain in the passage while footsteps fade above, and the house gathers the objects that will announce another morning. Shoes are placed where they can be found, books are left beside the lesson table, and weights rest ready for Emma Bloom and Olive Abrohalo's Elephanta. A coat hangs in the corridor for Millard Nullings, its empty sleeves illuminated by the final lamp. The garden lies outside beneath the same clouds, and the beds wait for Fiona Fraunfeld's measured attention. Hugh Apiston's bees remain within their shelter, while Enoch O'Connor's work is contained behind a closed door. Jacob has learned the order now, though he has not yet learned how to feel about a future that is already familiar. Night air enters through a narrow opening in the upper window, bringing the cool smell of wet earth and leaves. The boards beneath you retain the warmth of the day, though their surface is smooth and faintly cold, where the lamp does not reach. A balloon makes one slow movement near the ceiling, rising until its string tightens, and then descending towards the weight below. The corridor holds the fragrance of wool, apple, smoke, and old wood. From behind the wall comes one subdued note from the bees, followed by silence. Lamplight rests on an empty chair, then narrows as the flame lowers. In the quiet, each object appears to wait for its appointed use. The loop is comforting because it offers the children a dependable order, but it is also a reminder of arrested development. They have time to practice patience, courage, cooperation, and control, yet the years themselves do not carry them onward. A daily rhythm can make dangerous abilities feel domestic and manageable, although the same rhythm may preserve childhood beyond the point where childhood would naturally have ended. You see the contradiction in Jacob's expression as he stands among the familiar rooms. Nothing changes, and therefore almost everything can be learned. Nothing changes, and therefore no ordinary future can arrive. The house protects its residents from the outside world while asking them to remain within the shape of one particular day. Miss Peregrine maintains that day through vigilance, knowledge, and the quiet authority of care. Darkness gathers over the garden, smoothing the paths and hiding the soil beneath the beds. The windows reflect the rooms more clearly now, so that the interior seems to float over the blackness beyond. Coal smoke has thinned to a trace, leaving the cooler scent of damp timber and rain-washed stone. The floorboards beneath careful footsteps give one final sequence of creaks as the last movement passes overhead. A folded cloth rests beside the kitchen range, and the apple skins have curled into small red and green ribbons. The balloon hangs nearly still, held between its lift and its weight. Behind the wall, the bees wait in their hidden chamber, and the empty chair remains beneath the lamplight. At last, the house becomes quiet enough for the repeated mourning to be sensed before it arrives. You can imagine the kitchen returning to warmth, the kettle beginning its breath, and the children moving through dressing, lessons, and the garden according to the same dependable order. Emma Bloom will secure her weights, Oliver Brohelow's Elephanta will fasten her weighted shoes, and Millard Nullings will leave his clothing where it can speak for him. Fiona Fraunfeld will tend the plants, Hugh Apiston will keep his bees settled, Bronwyn Bruntley will lift what others cannot, and Enoch O'Connor will observe the limits placed around his peculiar gift. Jacob will wake again within a world where impossible things are treated as household matters. The house is already carrying the shape of the next identical morning, while the lamps fade gently around the empty chair. The lamps fade gently around the empty chair, and beyond the curtained windows, the repeated morning waits without haste, perfectly preserved beneath its veil of rain. At first, the sameness feels like mercy. You wake to the same pale light, the same measured footsteps, and the same breakfast arranged with quiet domestic care. Jacob learns that the house can contain danger by refusing to let danger advance. The guns remain distant, the aeroplanes suspended in their unfinished threat, while the children remain close to the ages they possessed when the loop began. A loop preserves its inhabitants from normal aging, yet it cannot make the outside world stand still. Beyond the garden, history continues along its ordinary road, carrying new winters, governments, grief, and names into the future. Within the house, the repeated date offers shelter from immediate historical dangers while limiting every child's contact with the wider world. The refuge protects them from the next day by preventing the next day from arriving. Evening rain gathers upon the locked gate, each drop catching the last grey light before slipping down the iron bars. The path beyond has darkened into a narrow ribbon between hedges, and water trembles upon every leaf. You can smell wet stone, soaked earth, and the faint mineral coolness rising from the old walls. A lantern burns above the gate, though its flame has little work to do beneath the heavy sky. Somewhere inside the house, a clock speaks through several walls, its sound softened by plaster, wood, and distance. The ticking reaches you as a patient pulse, while rain taps against the glass with irregular fingers. Beyond the garden's shelter, cold sea air moves across the fields, carrying salt from the unseen shore. Inside the enclosure, the air remains mild, familiar, and still, as though the house has persuaded the weather to pause. The children know the repeated day with a precision that ordinary life rarely permits. You can cross the kitchen without looking, reach for a cup before it is offered, and anticipate the creak beneath the third stair. Someone knows when the kettle will begin to murmur, when the schoolroom shutters will open, and when a particular bird will strike the orchard wall. Familiar conditions produce competence. They allow the children to respond quickly, preserve routines, and notice the smallest disturbance in an otherwise settled pattern. Yet knowledge of the same day can also become dependence upon it. A person who has rehearsed one morning for years may struggle when a different morning finally arrives. The children understand the house as one understands a well-loved piece of music, hearing every pause before it occurs. Their confidence belongs to the pattern, and the pattern belongs to the loop. Old photographs rest beside a bright modern road beyond the garden, though the road exists only in the world outside the boundary. In the photographs, faces remain young beneath stiff collars and carefully arranged hats, while lorries and buses pass beyond the hedge in the present age. You sense the strange collision between silvered paper and moving traffic, between a captured moment and a road that carries everything forward. Dust lies along the frames, gathering in corners where fingers seldom reach. The photographs smell faintly of cardboard, linen, and rooms closed for too long. A pale reflection travels over the glass whenever a vehicle passes outside, giving the still faces a brief shimmer of motion. Within the house, time is a room with its door shut. Beyond the garden, it is a road shining beneath rain. The apparent peace of the loop is sustained by refusing the next day, not by resolving the danger that waits beyond it. The war outside continues to give the fixed date its moral and historical weight. Each repetition contains the same approaching violence, and each repetition prevents that violence from completing its course. The children are safe from the immediate event, yet they are not released from its meaning. They inhabit a form of suspended history, preserved within the moment before catastrophe, while the world beyond absorbs its consequences. The date remains fixed, but the reasons for remembering it grow heavier. Every repeated dawn is both shelter and reminder. The children cannot claim that the danger has disappeared, because it has merely been held at the threshold. Their peace resembles a room where thunder has been stopped in the air. A clock heard through several walls marks the middle of the afternoon, its chime arriving in softened layers. You stand beneath the landing and feel the vibration pass through timber, plaster, and the polished banister. Dust rests upon the upper ledge, untouched except where a narrow trail suggests that someone has dragged a fingertip through it. In an unused room, the smell of old dust thickens around folded curtains and furniture covered with linen. The air has the dry sweetness of paper, faded varnish, and wool left in darkness. Rainwater ticks from the eaves into a stone trough outside, maintaining another quiet measure beneath the clock. The garden remains protected from the colder sea wind, but a thin draught finds its way under the door. It brushes your ankles and retreats, carrying the distant taste of salt. The children's bodies remain close to the ages at which they entered the loop, but their memories do not remain equally still. Years gather inside them as quietly as sediment beneath water. You may see a small face above a school uniform and hear a voice carrying decisions, losses, loyalties, and private knowledge far older than its appearance suggests. Emotional experiences deepen even when the body remains outwardly unchanged. A child who has watched the same sky for decades may understand patience with uncommon intensity. Another may carry an old fear beneath a youthful expression, having felt its presence through hundreds of identical evenings. This creates a tension between physical youth and accumulated experience. The face promises one measure of life, while the memory possesses another. The children are neither simply young nor conventionally old. They are preserved in body and altered in understanding. At the edge of the garden, rain gathers in shallow pools between the paving stones. The locked gate stands beyond them, black with moisture, and its hinges hold a faint orange line where the paint has begun to fail. You hear the sea beyond the shelter of the hedges, though the water itself remains hidden. Its low movement reaches the garden as a murmur beneath the closer sounds of dripping branches. A strand of ivy trembles against the wall whenever the wind shifts. Under the conservatory roof, glass beads with condensation, turning the outside world into a blurred arrangement of green and grey. The warmth within the house settles upon your skin, while the cold sea air waits beyond the final row of shrubs. The boundary is not visible as a wall, yet your body senses where comfort ends. Jacob's arrival makes the boundary between contemporary life and the loop increasingly unstable. He belongs to a later world, carrying knowledge of machines, films, roads, and ordinary expectations that the children have not shared. Through him, the outside age enters the house without opening the gate. His memories bring unfamiliar streets, different fashions, new technologies, and a relationship with time not founded upon repetition. You watch the children listen when Jacob speaks, measuring his words against the world they know. He's not merely a visitor from beyond the loop. He is evidence that the world has continued to change while the house remained fixed. His presence makes the distance between the repeated date and the present day impossible to ignore. The refuge begins to feel less like the whole world and more like one preserved room within it. A bright modern road lies beyond the old photographs, shining beneath passing rain. Headlamps move along it in white pairs, briefly illuminating hedges, branches, and the upper windows of the house. You see the road only in fragments, through gaps between leaves and the wavering panes of distant glass. Its surface gives back the sky in broken reflections, while water gathers along the verges in narrow silver channels. The garden remains dim and enclosed, scented with wet bark and the green bitterness of crushed stems. From an unused room comes the smell of dust whenever the draught stirs beneath the door. The clock through several walls has fallen silent for the moment, leaving space for the road's muted hiss. Beyond the shelter, cold sea air folds itself around the fields and continues towards other towns. The children must eventually decide when the protection of the house is no longer enough. That decision cannot be measured only by the danger outside, because danger takes many forms within a closed refuge. Protection preserves the body, yet freedom permits a person to choose a direction. A sanctuary can become a trap when its residents cannot safely leave or choose an ordinary future. The children may remain alive, sheltered, and beloved while their possible lives narrow around the same rooms. Ordinary time would have allowed departures, mistakes, friendships beyond the garden, and the gradual discovery of unfamiliar selves. The loop denies these choices in exchange for safety. Its central danger is not merely repetition, but the loss of choices ordinary time would have allowed. The question becomes not whether the house is safe, but whether safety alone is sufficient. Rain darkens the wooden bench beneath the cedar, and a shallow stream runs from the roof into the flower beds. You sit where the branches shelter you and feel the damp coolness rising through the fabric of your clothes. The smell of soil is rich beneath the rain, mixed with crushed rosemary and the faint sweetness of fallen apples. Drops strike the cedar needles overhead, gathering into larger beads that fall at uneven intervals. A gull calls somewhere beyond the hedges, its voice made thin by distance and weather. Through the garden wall, the sea breathes against the shore, hidden beneath low cloud. The house behind you glows with amber window light, and the locked gate ahead appears almost gentle beneath its wet sheen. Nothing in the scene declares imprisonment, because familiar places rarely announce the cost of remaining within them. Enemies of the peculiar community can use loops as part of wider schemes involving time and power. A hidden day may appear to be a private refuge, yet it can also become a resource sought by those who wish to control movement, history, or the lives preserved inside it. The same mechanism that protects the children can conceal plans, delay consequences, and shelter people whose intentions are far less merciful. The house can be attacked despite its temporal concealment. Its hidden position offers uncertainty, not invulnerability. If the loop is discovered, its repeated date may become a target. If its keeper is weakened, the walls may no longer provide the same protection. The children are sheltered from the world, but the world is not necessarily prevented from reaching them. Concealment changes the shape of danger without removing danger itself. In the corridor, watercolored light rests upon the floorboards, and the windows carry fine trails of rain. You pass beneath portraits whose varnished surfaces reflect the lamps in small, trembling points. The house smells of beeswax, damp wool, and the dust rising whenever an old door opens. From deep within the building, a clock sounds through several walls, diminished until each note resembles a distant spoon touching porcelain. The locked gate is visible from the far window, its bars standing against the evening like a patient row of dark strokes. Beyond the hedges, the modern road flashes occasionally with pale movement. Cold sea air presses against the glass, but cannot enter. The room holds its warmth around you, while the weather continues to work upon every surface beyond the sanctuary. The Ymbrynes' protection can fail through injury, capture, exhaustion, or discovery of the loop. Her authority depends upon attention, knowledge, and the strength to maintain rules more fragile than the children sometimes imagine. A single mistake may expose the house to an enemy waiting beyond the ordinary sequence of days. An injury may prevent the transformation required to defend the refuge. Capture may remove the person who understands the loop's boundaries and weaknesses. Exhaustion may turn careful guardianship into imperfect routine. Discovery may render concealment useless, allowing hostile forces to approach with preparation. The children therefore depend upon protection that is powerful but not absolute. Their safety is conditional, resting upon the continued integrity of one person, one place, and one repeated date. Fine rain moves across the garden in slanting threads, visible whenever the lantern above the gate brightens against the dusk. You stand near the hedge and hear droplets striking leaves with a sound like soft grains poured into a bowl. The path has lost its color beneath the wetness, appearing almost black, except where puddles catch the remaining sky. A cold current comes from beyond the garden's shelter, touching your hands before warmer air folds around them again. The smell of dust from an unused room drifts through an opened window, dry and faintly medicinal against the freshness outside. Far off, the road continues to carry traffic, each vehicle producing a brief wash of sound. The house remains quiet, but quiet does not mean untouched. Weather, distance, and time still press upon its boundaries. The books place questions of freedom and protection alongside the mechanics of peculiar abilities. They describe what the children can do, yet also preserve the larger uncertainty surrounding what those abilities are for. Strength may lift a stone, bees may answer a particular voice, and a body may vanish from ordinary sight. None of these gifts settles where a person should live or whom that person should obey. The children's powers make the house more defensible, but they also make its inhabitants valuable to those who seek influence. Protection may preserve a gift while restricting the life that gift could serve. The distinction between being safe and being free becomes increasingly important as the story expands beyond the house. A locked door can keep an enemy outside, while quietly deciding the future of everyone within. The rain has eased, leaving the gate covered in tiny beads that reflect the lamps like scattered stars. You hear water falling from the roof in a steady thread, while the garden releases the deep smell of wet roots and old stone. A photograph has slipped from its frame beside the window, showing a road narrower than the one beyond the hedge. Its paper feels dry and slightly rough beneath your fingers, and the faces upon it remain composed in captured silence. Through several walls, the clock resumes its measured ticking, each sound traveling patiently through the sleeping house. The sea wind has strengthened beyond the garden, yet the shrubs soften it before it reaches the path. For a moment, the sanctuary seems complete, a small island of warmth surrounded by darkness and moving water. Jacob changes the children's sense of what departure might mean. He has entered their preserved world, carrying evidence of a life that continued beyond it, making complete isolation more difficult to accept. Through Jacob, contemporary life is not an abstraction described in books. It is a presence with a voice, a memory, and an uncertain place among the children. His arrival does not simply add another peculiar person to the household. It alters the pressure exerted by the boundary. The children begin to understand that leaving the loop would bring exposure to ordinary time, while remaining would preserve their bodies at the cost of narrowing their lives further. Departure becomes both liberation and exposure. It promises movement, uncertainty, and choice, while also restoring aging, loss, and the full weight of history. Night settles upon the bright modern road, leaving only occasional bands of light between the trees. You can no longer distinguish the colors of the garden, though the wet leaves still shine whenever a vehicle passes beyond the hedge. The locked gate absorbs the darkness around it, and the hinges give a small sound when the wind moves through the bars. Beneath the porch, the air carries the smell of damp wood and extinguished coal. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard answers the distant clock with a slow, solitary creak. Cold sea air reaches the garden in sudden threads, slipping beneath the branches and stirring the curtains inside. The house remains warmer than the world beyond, but warmth does not reveal whether a place is a home, a refuge, or a prison. That knowledge belongs to the choices still available. The repeated date prevents seasonal change from becoming part of the children's lived experience inside the loop. They do not move gradually from one kind of light to another or watch the garden alter beneath different skies. The same weather may be present again and again, but it does not become a season in the ordinary sense. A child does not grow accustomed to winter's first frost or the heavy brightness of July. There is no true accumulation of spring, no progression towards autumn, and no winter arriving after a completed year. The children know descriptions of these changes, yet description is not the same as participation. Their memories deepen without receiving the natural sequence that usually gives memory its shape. Time has become a collection of impressions without a reliable horizon. The unused room is colder at night, and dust hangs in the narrow beam cast by a single lamp. You stand beside a covered table while the fabric gives off the dry scent of linen stored for too long. Outside, rain begins again, tapping the window with delicate variations that never quite form a rhythm. A clock can still be heard through several walls, though the intervening rooms make its ticking seem to belong to another house. Along the far road, modern lights move quickly, gathering speed and vanishing before the eye can follow. The gate remains locked, its wet metal cold beneath your palm. Beyond the hedge, the sea sends a deeper breath inland, and the garden's shelter breaks it into a whisper. Dust, rain, clocks, and distant traffic occupy different times at once. Leaving the loop exposes peculiar people to the ordinary passage of time. Their bodies would begin again along a natural course, carrying age, illness, fatigue, and change in ways the house has prevented. The prospect may be frightening, particularly for children who have known preservation as the condition of survival. Outside, every day would be different, and every difference would demand a response. Friends could leave permanently, places could disappear, and a familiar face could alter over the years. Yet the return of ordinary time would also permit growth that the loop has suspended. The children could learn new skills within changing circumstances, form relationships beyond inherited boundaries, and choose futures not already contained by the repeated date. Liberation would not be pure comfort. It would be the opening of a door onto weather, distance, and mortality. A narrow path leads from the garden towards the shore, but the hedges conceal most of it from the house. You follow its damp stones while the evening rain gathers on your sleeves. Salt sharpens the air, and the wind carries the muffled grinding of pebbles beneath the tide. The garden behind you remains sheltered, marked by the soft glow of windows and the faint outline of the gate. Ahead, the sea is only a deeper darkness beneath the clouds. Grass bends in broad waves along the path, revealing and hiding small shells among the mud. Somewhere within the house, a door closes, and the sound fades beneath the weather. The distance between safety and freedom can be measured in a few dozen steps, though those steps lead across an entire understanding of life. The children's growing need to act beyond the house arises from knowledge rather than restlessness alone. They understand that the world outside is dangerous, but they also understand that danger is already connected to the loop. Enemies may seek the house, the peculiar community, and the power contained in repeated time. Waiting within the sanctuary cannot guarantee that threats will remain outside its walls. The house is safe only so long as the rules of the loop remain intact. When those rules become known, weakened, or deliberately challenged, passivity begins to carry its own danger. The children must consider whether protection has prepared them to survive or merely postponed the moment of decision. Their abilities matter because circumstances are changing around them. The familiar pattern can no longer contain every consequence of the wider world. Rainwater runs from the gatepost into the gravel, tracing a narrow channel towards the lower garden. You hear the water beside you and the clock beyond several walls, two different measures crossing through the night. The smell of wet earth rises from the flower beds, while the unused room continues to exhale its dry breath of dust. A modern car passes along the bright road, its headlights whitening the tree trunks before disappearing beyond the bend. The house windows hold a softer yellow, each reflecting furniture, curtains, and the movement of people who remain inside. Cold sea air moves through the hedge and rests briefly against your face. Nothing in the garden changes enough to be called transformation, yet every small sound confirms that the world is still active. Safety can preserve a life from immediate destruction, while freedom allows that life to encounter uncertainty and make its own meaning. The loop offers safety through restriction, and that restriction is not without kindness. Its walls contain affection, education, food, and the ordinary rituals that make frightening circumstances bearable. Nevertheless, kindly confinement remains confinement when leaving is impossible or ruinously dangerous. The sanctuary has protected its residents by narrowing their world. That narrowing has saved them from one history while separating them from another. The children's difficulty lies in recognizing that both statements can be true at once. A place may deserve gratitude and still require departure. The garden lies almost colorless under the late rain, with only the pale roses retaining a little brightness. You brush against the hedge and feel water gather along the leaves before falling onto your wrist. The locked gate stands at the end of the path, and the road beyond shines as if polished. A photograph beside the entrance has swollen slightly from damp, its old faces wavering beneath the glass. Somewhere deeper in the house, the clock marks another hour through layers of wall and carpet. The sound seems patient rather than urgent, yet it reminds you that even silence contains duration. Beyond the sheltered shrubs, the sea wind presses against the branches and finds every opening. The garden remains enclosed, but enclosure cannot prevent the world from being felt. The preserved youth of the children gives them time, yet time without movement can become another form of deprivation. They have accumulated memories, while the visible signs of living remain absent from their faces. Each child carries experiences that would ordinarily have altered posture, voice, and expression. Their bodies say one thing, while their memories say another. This difference can protect them from some forms of aging, but it can also confuse their place among ordinary people. Outside the loop, they may be treated as children despite the weight they carry. Inside it, they are understood by others who share the same contradiction. The house gives them belonging, but the world beyond may offer choices that belonging alone cannot provide. A dry smell rises from the unused room as the door remains open to the corridor. You can distinguish dust, old glue, and the faint sweetness of wood that has absorbed generations of polish. Rain darkens the window frame, and a thin line of water moves beneath the sill. From the garden comes the occasional knock of a branch against the wall. The distant road glimmers beyond the photographs, carrying a present that refuses to resemble the captured past. Through several walls, the clock continues its slow counting, each note separated by spacious silence. Sea air enters whenever the outer door shifts, cold enough to raise a fine tension along your arms. The room has been spared change, but preservation has left it unused. The war outside continues to give the fixed date its moral and historical weight. It is not merely the background to the children's safety, nor simply the reason the loop was created. The conflict represents the world's capacity to injure ordinary people, while the repeated date preserves the children from one particular instant of that capacity. Each return protects them from the immediate event, but it also keeps them near the knowledge that others beyond the loop are not protected. The children therefore live with a responsibility that cannot be completed inside the house. They remember a danger the wider world must endure. The loop's apparent peace depends upon refusing the next day, and no refusal can resolve what that day contains. Its quiet is morally complicated because it rests beside suffering that continues elsewhere. Wind moves through the garden after the rain, shaking water from the upper branches in scattered showers. You hear the drops strike the paving stones, the windows, and the roof of the conservatory. The locked gate gives a faint metallic rattle, though the latch does not move. A bright road runs beyond the trees, its traffic reduced now to occasional whispers and brief silver glances. The house smells of damp coats drying beside the hearth, while the unused room contributes its older fragrance of dust and faded paper. Beneath everything, the sea keeps its slow pressure against the shore. The clock behind several walls continues to mark the night with restrained authority. No sound is loud, yet each one confirms that the sanctuary is surrounded by a moving world. The book's account of peculiar abilities cannot be separated from the larger questions of freedom and protection. A power may appear wondrous when considered alone, yet its meaning changes when institutions, enemies, and historical dangers surround it. The children have not chosen every condition under which their abilities are used. Some gifts make them useful to the house, some make them vulnerable, and some make them responsible for protecting others. The loop organizes these differences into a stable order, but stability can disguise the absence of consent. As the story expands beyond the house, every ability becomes connected to movement, allegiance, and risk. The children must ask whether protection preserves their agency or simply preserves their usefulness. Their peculiar talents cannot answer that question, because only choice can answer it. Night rain gathers upon the gate until the iron bars shine beneath the lantern. You rest your hand against the cold metal and feel the steady chill pass into your fingers. Beyond the hedge, the road has become a long, dark surface interrupted by pale reflections. The sea air is colder now, carrying the smell of salt, kelp, and stone. Water moves through the garden's channels, slipping beneath leaves and around the roots of sleeping plants. Behind you, the house retains the warm scent of smoke, beeswax, and wool. The clock through several walls sounds once, then leaves the corridor to silence. The gate remains a simple object, yet it holds the weight of every possible departure. Its lock is small enough to fit within a hand, but the decision beyond it cannot be held so easily. The children must decide when the house's protection is no longer enough, even if no single moment announces the answer. A sanctuary does not become a prison through one dramatic change. Its walls narrow gradually, its routines become more necessary, and its rules acquire the appearance of nature. The children may begin by accepting the repeated day as an extraordinary gift. Later, they recognize that the gift carries obligations, exclusions, and risks that deepen with time. The longer they remain, the more difficult departure becomes, because familiarity turns into a second form of shelter. The house has taught them how to survive within its boundaries, but not necessarily how to live beyond them. Their next choice must therefore concern not only safety, but the kind of life safety is meant to preserve. Rain recedes towards the sea, leaving the garden shining beneath a thin break in the cloud. You see the locked gate outlined against the brighter horizon, while the modern road beyond begins to reflect the first color of morning. Old photographs beside the entrance remain dim and sepia-toned, the paper faces untouched by the changing light. The unused room smells of dust, warmed by a narrow beam entering through the shutters. A clock heard through several walls measures the approach of another familiar hour. The garden's shelter softens the cold sea air, though the wind still reaches the flowers and bends their stems. Somewhere inside the house, a kettle begins its quiet work. The scene is peaceful enough to be mistaken for permanence. The apparent peace cannot last forever, because the outside world does not share the loop's agreement with repetition. Jacob's presence has made that truth impossible to ignore, and the children's memories have grown too deep to be contained by a single unchanging morning. They carry knowledge of years while appearing almost unchanged, and that contradiction presses against the walls of the refuge. They know the same day well enough to master it, yet they have not been permitted to know the full sequence of days. Their competence has developed within familiar conditions, while their dependence upon those conditions has developed alongside it. To leave would expose them to ordinary time, but remaining would surrender choices that ordinary time might still offer. The danger of growing beyond the loop is therefore the danger of becoming ready for a life the loop cannot provide. Morning light reaches the road beyond the garden and turns the wet surface briefly bright. You stand beneath the trees while the last rain drips from leaves, each drop making a small hollow sound in the soil. The gate remains locked, but the iron has lost its night-dark color and now shows the brown of age beneath the paint. Salt hangs in the air from the sea, mingling with the scent of wet grass and the dry dust of the unused room. Through several walls, the clock begins its measured sequence, and the house prepares to repeat itself. Curtains shift in the first current of indoor air. Photographs beside the road hold their old faces steady as modern light travels past them. The world beyond is already moving, while the sanctuary gathers another identical morning. The morning is cool beside the gate, with rainwater still resting in the grooves of the path. You hear gulls beyond the hedges, the soft opening and closing of doors, and the clock traveling through several walls. The bright road carries new light along its surface, while the old photographs remain fixed beside it like quiet witnesses. Dust lingers in the unused room, stirred by the first movement of air beneath the door. Cold sea air reaches through the garden's shelter and touches the leaves before withdrawing towards the shore. Behind you, the house begins the familiar sequence of voices, footsteps, and household sounds. Ahead, the gate keeps its silence. The sanctuary has protected its residents by narrowing their world. and the cost of that protection rests gently upon the morning. Beyond the silent gate, the world does not end with the house, although the house has been made to feel like an entire world. Roads continue along the island, boats cross the grey water, and distant communities keep their own hours beneath the protection of other Ymbrynes. Miss Peregrine's house is one local refuge within a much larger conflict, a single shelter among many concealed places where peculiar children and their guardians have gathered against danger. Under floorboards, maps lie folded into patient squares, marked with islands, cities, railway lines, and boundaries that ordinary travelers cannot see. Some routes cross familiar countryside, while others pass through temporal spaces created by Ymbrynes, where an afternoon may remain unchanged for decades. The peculiar world is organized through hidden communities, refuges, and loops, each offering a different answer to the same old difficulty: how to preserve vulnerable lives when history refuses to pause. The house rests beneath a pale morning, its windows holding the last grey light before dawn. Damp stone surrounds the garden wall, and the paths have darkened beneath the night's rain. Somewhere beyond the rooms, a floorboard gives a small wooden creak, followed by the muted movement of someone crossing the hall. The air carries salt from the sea, ashes from the kitchen fire, and the faint, dry scent of old paper. In another town, perhaps beneath the clock of a railway station, a different Ymbryne may be watching the same darkness settle over her charges. Elsewhere, children sleep inside a repeating morning preserve behind a shopfront, a mill, a chapel, or a narrow courtyard hidden between taller buildings. The dates differ, the architecture changes, and the dangers take different forms, yet each loop is a chamber in the same larger maze. Jacob's experience allows the ordinary modern chronology of school days, journeys, and calendar pages to be compared with peculiar temporal life. He arrives from a world where the past is completed and the future advances in a single direction. Within the loop, however, the past may become a shelter, while the future waits outside like weather beyond a closed door. The house's repeating day is easier to understand as one solution to a broader problem of survival. Rain gathers on the railway platform beyond the island, striking the roof in a soft, irregular pattern. Water threads down the dark glass of a waiting carriage, bending the lamps into trembling lines. Beneath the shelter, the stone floor gives back each footstep with a dull echo, while the rails shine faintly beneath the wet night. A folded map rests inside a coat pocket, its creases softened by repeated handling. A loop can hide a household, but several loops together form something more complicated than a collection of separate shelters. They become a network of routes, meeting places, and guarded passages through which information, supplies, and people may move. The same network creates the possibility of pursuit, rescue, and displacement between loops. A refuge is safer when it is not alone, yet every connection also offers another path by which danger may arrive. The lantern light in a stone passage trembles whenever the wind finds a crack in the masonry. Its glow rests upon worn steps, iron hinges, and a narrow shelf crowded with jars of cloudy glass. Moisture beads upon the walls, gathering in the hollows between individual stones. From somewhere below comes the quiet dripping of water, and from above, the softer sound of rain touching the roof tiles. Ymbrynes connect the private safety of a house with the organization of the wider, peculiar community. Their authority is not simply domestic, though it may begin with meals, lessons, medicines, and the careful arrangement of sleeping rooms. They maintain knowledge of neighboring loops, dangerous territories, trusted messengers, and the fragile agreements that allow one refuge to assist another. Beneath the calm routine of a household lies an entire system of watchfulness. The children's repeated morning returns with the steadiness of a familiar piece of music. Light enters the same bedroom window, finding the same curtains and touching the same edges of furniture. In the kitchen, plates are arranged for breakfast. Voices gather in their known order, and the day's first movements begin without surprise. Even the smallest details acquire weight when encountered again and again, because repetition turns ordinary objects into guardians of memory. Miss Peregrine's house remains precious because it is particular. Its corridors have known the children's quarrels, games, lessons, injuries, and reconciliations. Its garden has received their footsteps through countless versions of the same date. Its walls have preserved not only bodies, but relationships, habits, and the quiet assurance that one morning will follow another. Yet the shelter is not independent of the world beyond its fence, and that world is becoming increasingly difficult to hold away. The soft rustle of old photograph moves through a room where no one is speaking. Cards slide against one another inside a wooden box, their edges worn smooth by many hands. Faces remain still within the small rectangles, preserved beneath silvered surfaces that catch the weak light. A desk stands beneath the window, its drawers filled with letters, records, and maps whose routes lead beyond the island into a geography of hidden doors. Hollow City is the second novel in Riggs's series, continuing the story after Miss Peregrine's home for peculiar children. Its movement away from the island house enlarges the meaning of the first refuge, showing that the children have entered a world where many sanctuaries are threatened at once. The later story expands the geography of loops and the number of peculiar communities at risk. What first seemed like one family's crisis becomes part of a wider disturbance. Jacob carries the knowledge of the house into places where its rules no longer offer complete protection. He has learned that a date may be both a prison and a promise, and that the boundary between safety and danger can be crossed by a single step. The children travel with their abilities, their memories, and their imperfect understanding of the routes ahead. Their journey tests whether safety can be carried beyond one fixed date. Rain falls steadily upon a railway platform, softening every outline and filling the distance with a grey veil. The station lamps cast small pools of amber on the ground, where puddles tremble beneath the drops. Cold air moves along the tracks and enters the sleeves of a coat. Far away, a signal changes colour, and the sound travels through the wet darkness before the train itself can be heard. The peculiar children's abilities become part of a collective effort rather than remaining only household curiosities. A talent that once seemed useful for an individual task may become essential when a group must cross a dangerous boundary, recover a missing person, or defend a refuge. Strength, levitation, plant growth, invisibility, fire, and the control of living matter acquire meaning through cooperation. The children are no longer simply being protected from the world. They are helping to protect one another within it. A railway carriage waits beneath the rain with its windows clouded by breath and damp. The seats hold the faint smell of wool, leather, and coal smoke, while the floor vibrates beneath the distant movement of machinery. Outside, the platform recedes into darkness, marked by yellow lamps and the occasional passing figure. A map lies open across a vacant seat, its inked roots crossing one another like threads in a patient web. Multiple loops mean that time can function as a network of shelters and routes. A person may leave one preserved day and enter another, passing from one arrangement of history into a different one. The journey is not merely geographical, because each threshold changes the relationship between memory, danger, and possibility. A street may remain in one year, while a doorway beyond it opens into another, and the traveler must understand both spaces before proceeding. The same rules that make loops recognizable also make them part of a system that can be navigated or targeted. A repeated sunrise, a fixed meal, and an unchanging sequence of streets provide stability, but they also leave patterns that an enemy may study. Boundaries can be defended, yet their locations may be discovered. Doors can be hidden, though not perfectly, and a sanctuary becomes a maze when every exit leads into another danger or temporal boundary. Cold water gathers beneath the stones outside the house, reflecting fragments of sky between the grass. The garden wall feels rough beneath a resting hand, its surface powdered with pale grit and darkened by the weather. Leaves turn slowly in the wind, showing their lighter undersides before settling again. Beyond the trees, the sea shifts without hurry, each low wave carrying a muted line of silver towards the shore. The calm domestic scenes of the house stand against threats of violence, capture, and the destruction of refuges. A breakfast table may be prepared while hostile forces approach. A lesson may begin beneath the same ceiling where fear has already entered the walls. Such contrasts do not weaken the sanctuary's value. They reveal why it matters. Peace becomes more visible when held close to danger, and more fragile when the surrounding world has begun to move. The repeated mourning gathers its details once more. A cup waits beside a plate, a chair stands slightly apart from the table, and a familiar voice carries through the passage. The children wake within a date preserved by design, yet their understanding of that date has changed. It is no longer only a pleasant enclosure. It has become a measure of what must be defended, what may be lost, and what cannot remain untouched forever. Miss Peregrine's house, the island, and the year preserved within the loop are all parts of one central image. A house held at the edge of catastrophe, repeating its last safe day. The image is gentle because the day itself contains ordinary pleasures. It is troubling because safety depends upon refusing the movement of history. The house endures by remaining in place, while the children gradually discover that endurance may require movement. Lantern light rests along the stone passage in long, uneven bands. The flame bends inside its glass, turning the nearest wall gold and leaving the far end in softer brown darkness. Dust lies upon the stair treads, except where recent footsteps have disturbed it. The passage smells of wet wool, mineral water, and the faint smoke of a lamp that has burned through many nights. The children's story moves from the island house towards the wider, peculiar world in later books, changing the scale of every earlier memory. The bedroom window is no longer merely a window, because beyond it lie other windows, other houses, and other children living under other arrangements of time. The garden gate becomes one boundary among many. The house remains a beginning, but it cannot remain the whole map. The first novel appeared in 2011 when Riggs's combination of photographs, found documents, and invented history introduced readers to this peculiar setting. Burton's film adaptation appeared in 2016, carrying the central images into another form of cultural memory. The film's release date belongs to the history of the adaptation, not to the fictional chronology of the loop. Outside the story, calendars continued to advance, while the house remained fixed within its repeating day. Old photographs shift softly as air passes through the room. Their surfaces catch the glow of a nearby lamp, revealing pale faces, dark clothing, and backgrounds that seem both distant and carefully arranged. The paper corners lift and settle. Somewhere beyond the wall, rain brushes against a window, and the sound blends with the faint creak of timber adjusting to the night's cold. Visual evidence gives the series a distinctive way of making time feel material. Photographs appear as objects from another era, while found documents suggest that the peculiar world has been recorded by many hands. Each image carries an atmosphere of proof, even when its meaning remains uncertain. The children do not encounter the past only as an abstract account. They find it pressed into paper, stored in boxes, and preserved inside the surfaces of everyday things. Jacob's perspective deepens that contrast between ordinary modern life and peculiar temporal existence. A photograph may be an old family object in his world, while within the story it becomes a doorway into lives that have continued beneath a fixed date. His memories move forward, but the loop returns. His body belongs to one chronology, and his new relationships belong to another. The tension between these systems gives the sanctuary its quiet emotional pressure. At the edge of the island, rain darkens the railway platform of memory into a long, shining strip. There is no crowd, only the suggestion of distant travel in the empty tracks and the occasional tremor beneath the ground. Water ticks from the iron roof into a shallow gutter. A folded map rests beneath a wooden bench, protected from the worst of the weather, but softened by years of damp air. A refuge can remain meaningful even when it cannot last forever. Its purpose is not necessarily to defeat history or preserve every inhabitant unchanged. Sometimes it gives frightened people enough time to become capable of choosing their next direction. It teaches trust, provides knowledge, and gathers separate lives into a community. When the shelter must be left, these things may travel with those who were protected inside it. The house's repeating mourning carries a similar meaning. It is a pause made for survival, not a claim that the world outside has disappeared. Each return to the date restores the rooms, the paths, and the sequence of daily life, yet it cannot erase the knowledge that threats exist beyond the loop. The sanctuary preserves a condition in which the children may grow, even though the calendar itself remains still. Dawn returning to the same bedroom window is almost imperceptible at first. A grey line appears between the curtain and the frame, then spreads across the glass until the garden becomes visible again. The air holds the cool scent of rain-soaked leaves. From the lower rooms rises the smell of bread, wood smoke, and water warming in a kettle, while the first birds call from the trees. The children are not unchanged simply because the date is unchanged. Their memories accumulate, their loyalties deepen, and their understanding of danger becomes more exact. A fixed day can contain a moving interior life. The loop holds the external scene in place, while the people within it become older in knowledge, courage, grief, and responsibility. Time has not stopped entirely. It has been redirected into the minds of those who inhabit the shelter. Ymbrynes preserve life by manipulating time, but preservation carries a price. The protected may be separated from the wider flow of history, and the world they leave behind may become unfamiliar. A safe date may become difficult to abandon because it contains everyone who was loved there. Yet every refuge must exist in relation to other refuges, and the network beyond the house eventually asks its inhabitants to move. The stone passage is quiet beneath the first suggestion of morning. Lantern light thins as the windows begin to pale, leaving the walls cool and colorless. Moisture shines in the cracks between the stones. A distant door closes with careful restraint, and the sound travels along the passage before fading into the deeper silence of the house. The possibility of rescue gives the network its warmth, while the possibility of pursuit gives it its fear. A hidden loop may receive a family fleeing another refuge, or send a messenger towards a community under attack. Routes allow people to escape destruction, but they also mean that no shelter is entirely isolated. The maze protects through its complexity, and the same complexity demands memory, courage, and trust. A map folded beneath the floorboards remembers paths that no ordinary traveler would consider connected. Its paper has been pressed into new shapes by repeated unfolding, and its corners retain the softness of cloth. Along one margin, small marks indicate doors, stations, and boundaries. Beneath the house, the map rests in darkness, while above it the household follows the old sequence of breakfast, conversation, and footsteps. The later geography of loops makes the peculiar world feel less like a single hidden island and more like a scattered civilization. Communities may be separated by distance, language, architecture, or century, yet they remain connected by shared dangers and the work of their Ymbrynes. The children's journey moves through this civilization without ever making it simple. Every refuge has its customs, its history, and its particular form of vulnerability. Leaving may mean crossing a railway platform in the rain, entering a city whose streets belong to another year, or searching for a door that appears only under certain conditions. The route away from danger can be as uncertain as the danger itself. Yet remaining still may expose the refuge to forces that have already learned where it lies. The sea beyond the garden is now a broad sheet of dull blue beneath the early sky. Thin clouds drift above the horizon, their undersides touched with a color almost silver. Wet grass bends beneath the breeze and releases a green, earthy fragrance. Along the wall, drops gather upon the leaves and fall one by one, each landing softly among the darkened stones. The children's abilities matter most when the world around them becomes connected. A peculiar gift is no longer merely an unusual feature of one child's life. It can help open a passage, conceal a group, restore a damaged refuge, or carry a message through an impossible space. The household becomes a small part of a collective effort, and the children begin to understand themselves as participants in a history larger than their own protection. The house still offers meals, rooms, arguments, books, and the familiar comfort of a repeated morning. These domestic details do not become insignificant when the wider conflict appears. Instead, they show what the conflict threatens to erase. Violence can destroy walls, but it also interrupts routines, separates companions, and turns remembered places into evidence of absence. The importance of a refuge lies partly in the ordinary life it allows to continue. A photograph lies upon a table beside a folded letter, its paper cool and faintly curled. The faces within it remain patient beneath the thin reflection of dawn. Dust settles along the frame, and the room's changing light moves slowly over the image. Outside, rainwater slips from the roof in narrow streams, while inside the house, the floorboards answer the first steps of the day. The series photographs and found documents make the hidden world feel discovered rather than invented from a distance. They suggest that the peculiar past has always been close to the ordinary one, separated by attention, secrecy, and the work of those who guard the boundaries. The images also remind the reader that memory is never complete. A photograph preserves a moment, but it does not preserve everything that occurred before or after it. Jacob's arrival brings the modern world into contact with this older order of protection. He knows the speed of ordinary chronology, where dates are printed on screens, newspapers, and school calendars. The peculiar children know another kind of duration, in which one day may shelter generations of feeling. Neither system is entirely sufficient by itself. Their meeting creates a difficult but necessary understanding of what it means to live with history, rather than simply move through it. The railway platform remains empty beneath a paling sky. Rain has weakened to a fine mist, and the roof releases the last drops at longer intervals. The lamps have not yet gone dark, though their reflections are less visible upon the wet ground. A cold current moves through the station, carrying coal, iron, and the faint scent of distant fields after weather. The date preserved by Miss Peregrine's loop is not an escape from history so much as a carefully made shelter within it. The house continues to stand because an earlier moment has been held open, but the lives inside that moment remain vulnerable to events beyond its boundary. The loop offers time enough for protection, not certainty enough for permanent peace. Its strength is also its limitation. The emotional weight of the repeated mourning grows from this limitation. Each breakfast is familiar, yet each familiarity contains the knowledge that other communities may be suffering beyond the island. Each open window offers light, but also reveals a world in which the house cannot remain hidden forever. The children's affection for the sanctuary does not prevent them from leaving it. Their attachment gives departure its meaning. Beneath the floorboards, maps lie in their folded darkness while the house awakens above them. A chair scrapes gently against the floor. Someone speaks in a low voice near the kitchen, and another voice answers from farther along the corridor. The scent of toast, moves beneath the door, mingling with damp wood and the cool mineral smell rising from the foundations. The peculiar world's rules are ultimately about the price of preserving life when history refuses to pause. A loop protects by narrowing possibilities, while the wider network restores some of the movement that protection has removed. The children must learn when to remain, when to cross a boundary, and when to accept that safety cannot be carried in the same form forever. Their journey is therefore both physical and moral. Miss Peregrine's house gives the children a place from which to understand danger. It teaches them the shape of a protected life, the habits of a community, and the obligations that accompany belonging. Beyond the island, those lessons are tested among strangers, threatened loops, and routes that refuse to remain stable. The house remains present in memory, even when its walls are no longer around them. Dawn rests upon the same bedroom window, just as it has rested there through countless returns. The glass brightens, the curtain loosens in the air, and the garden appears with its wet leaves and pale path. A bird moves among the branches, shaking loose a few droplets. From the sea comes a long, low sound that seems to belong equally to the night ending and the morning beginning. A refuge may be temporary and still be real. Its walls may be broken, its rooms abandoned, or its inhabitants carried into another century, yet the protection it once provided cannot be dismissed as an illusion. For a while, frightened lives were given shelter, and ordinary tenderness was allowed to continue. In a world of pursuit, that interval becomes a form of resistance. The house stands again at the edge of catastrophe, holding its last safe day in place. The date begins anew, bringing the same light across the same floor and the same first movements through the rooms. Beyond the garden, the wider world continues through its own years, carrying railways, cities, wars, migrations, and hidden communities towards unknown mornings. The loop does not stop history. It shelters a small number of lives while history passes around them. Lantern light fades completely from the stone passage as daylight enters through the upper windows. The walls retain a trace of warmth near the lamp, while the lower steps remain cool beneath the morning air. Rainwater shines in the seams of the masonry. A photograph shifts beneath a slight current, and its paper makes the softest sound against the table. The central question is not whether the sanctuary can last forever. It is whether the people within it can become capable of carrying its values into places where its walls cannot follow. The children leave with memories of repeated breakfasts, guarded doors, and the gentle order of a protected household. They also carry the knowledge that other children wait within other loops, each refuge asking for care beyond its own boundary. Miss Peregrine's house is one room in the maze, but it is the room through which the larger pattern first becomes visible. Its repeating day reveals the ingenuity of protection, while its threatened walls reveal the cost of relying upon one fixed point. The Ymbrynes network offers routes between sanctuaries, yet every route carries uncertainty. Rescue and pursuit remain close companions along the same temporal paths. The folded maps beneath the floorboards are still there, holding their marks in the darkness. The railway platform remains somewhere beyond the island, wet beneath its lamps and waiting for journeys between years. Old photographs rest in their boxes, their faces unchanged, while the people who study them grow older. In the bedroom, dawn returns to the same window, touching the curtains with a quiet, colorless hand. The date begins again, and the house accepts the morning as though it has never known another. Footsteps move through the passage. Voices gather in the rooms. A kettle warms, plates are set out, and the familiar domestic world resumes its gentle arrangement. Beyond the gate, the wider peculiar world continues through its hidden communities, refuges, and temporal spaces, moving carefully through the maze of history. In that continuing world, a sanctuary remains meaningful because it once held life against destruction. Its limitations do not cancel its mercy. and its ending does not make its shelter less complete. The house has preserved a morning, the children have carried its memory outward, and the wider network waits beyond the sea. Under the returning light, the same bedroom window opens upon another beginning.